3 minutes after 10 is the time, and if ever there were a compelling case for making this programme compulsory listening, it was yesterday's programme, particularly the segments on Natalie Elphick's defection to the Labour Party. I don't know what you took away from it if you were listening. If you weren't, I'll sum up briefly, because something has just happened in the last few minutes that speaks directly to the conclusions we arrived at. The line that I think, one of the lines that resonated most with me was the idea that Keir Starmer had given permission to Tory voters to vote Labour, which, if you are interested in winning power, is not only desirable but probably also necessary. And then there was a text from a listener called Lawrence, which just pointed out that the Labour Party has to speak to people that I might not like, because their vote is worth as much as mine and they've got as much right to be here voting as I have. So any thoughts or hopes, perhaps in some quarters, any hopes that the mixed reaction to Natalie Elphick's defection, which I think can be best described as a hold your nose moment for many traditional Labour voters and supporters, any hopes or fears that would introduce reservations to the party leadership have just been firmly scotched in Dover, where Natalie Elphick has just appeared behind the podium to introduce Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, who I presume, unless we're looking at one of the longest warm-ups in political history, I presume it will fall to Yvette Cooper to introduce Keir Starmer shortly. So there you've got the Dover MP, now Labour, briefly, because she's not standing at the next election, widely associated with particularly pungent opposition to immigration in general. I think that's fair to say, but the refugee crisis in particular, small boats in particular, essentially warming up the audience for Keir Starmer's looming speech about how his party will address the scourge of smuggling gangs. So, I mean, that is what I believe the kids call doubling down. Absolutely no sign there whatsoever that there are any reservations or conniptions in the mind of Keir Starmer over that defection yesterday. And the reason that I began the programme by blowing smoke up my own backside, or rather the contributors to yesterday's programme's backsides, collective backsides. No, I tell a lie. She's introduced someone else that's not Keir Starmer. But this isn't our conversation for the top of the show today. I'm just pointing out that conclusion we arrived at, in some cases perhaps reluctantly, that this was very, very good politics, has become impossible to resist. One thing I noticed on Twitter, and please don't start shouting at me, but some of the people who were keenest to denigrate Keir Starmer for accepting Natalie Elphick into the party were SNP supporters, which confused me slightly until I saw the polling this morning, which has seen Labour put a little bit of clear blue water between themselves and the SNP for the first time I can remember. And John in Reading quite rightly points out, no, James, the real highlight of the programme was Nicola Ethical. That was Rowan, the last caller of the day, getting his words a little bit jumbled up and accidentally inventing a new Viz character, Nicola Ethical. But I digress. Have you heard the booze? So that was a performance by Eden Golan, who is the Israeli entry for the Eurovision Song Contest, being disrupted by protesters in the room where it happens. There were between 10 and 12,000 protesters massed in the centre of Malmö, also objecting to her presence in the contest. And I don't know that the likes of this have ever been seen before. Greta Thunberg was there, extending her remit lately from climate activism to broader political issues. Young people are leading well, I don't need to read her words to you. You can hear them for yourself.
We think it is outrageous and inexcusable for Eurovision to let Israel participate while committing a genocide. It's a song contest where Israel, a country that is currently committing a genocide in Gaza, are allowed to compete. When a country behaves in a way that is unacceptable, then Eurovision excludes them. So why not Israel?
And finally, the chanting of that crowd, which marks a political moment that, well, it certainly focuses the mind, doesn't it?
Dirty, dirty competition! Dirty, dirty competition! Dirty, dirty competition! Dirty, dirty competition! Israel out of Eurovision! Israel out of Eurovision! Israel out of Eurovision! Israel out of Eurovision!
Gosh, Eurovision, historically quite a ridiculous contest. I think even Terry Wogan would struggle to inject much humour into this scenario, although I suspect if anybody could, it would be the late, great Sir Terry Wogan. I certainly won't try. What was the moment for you where you thought something fairly profound had shifted beneath your feet on this issue? And it will depend slightly on how closely you follow things, where you just thought, there is a detachment here. There is a detachment underway. I think there's two things. There's a specific moment for me as someone who's followed it from the United Kingdom, and that would be when Suella Braverman called them hate marches, which was such an obvious misrepresentation of the massive majority of people who were objecting to, in the strongest terms, the continuing slaughter of innocent people in Gaza. And to describe it as a hate march just struck me as a real moment of, probably in her case, quite deliberate detachment from observable reality. You can never be sure with this lot whether it's a deliberate detachment from observable reality or a consequence of epic ignorance. That was huge, I think, because it was such a dichotomy, such a divisive way to behave, and then of course to blame the police for I don't know, sort of small minorities of profoundly unpleasant people or positions being pursued on those enormous marches, to somehow claim that it was grounds to ban them altogether or that the police were somehow remiss, was deeply dangerous for a former Home Secretary. But that was huge. That spoke to me of Israel getting support from people that were not going to be helpful in the long term. People who by that point were offering Israel encouragement to continue the killing in Gaza struck me as people who were not really motivated by the best interests of Israel. Some of them, I'm not saying this necessarily about Suella Braverman, but some of them, particularly on the sort of right wing of British media, seem to be more motivated by almost a form of relish at Muslims being killed in Gaza. And some of them, of course, had long and troubling histories of Islamophobia. So I think I said to you at the time, you need to be careful. You need to choose your friends very, very carefully at times like this, because the people who are applauding every tactical decision, applauding every move, applauding, in a sense, every death in Gaza are not necessarily the people who have your best interests at heart. Critical friends are crucial in times of crisis, and Israel didn't really do much to look after us, to look after what you might describe as critical friends. And then the second point, which is fixed into the first. Peter's come up with a text which is very helpful. This is the other point where Israel lost the battle for hearts and minds, and Peter is still doing it. He writes, they're not hate marches, they're pro-Hamas terrorist supporting marches like when the Nazis marched. And that decision, which is obviously not Peter's, he's merely a seagull following the trawler, but that decision by the kind of people I've just described to try to depict everybody objecting to the killing in Gaza as somehow being supportive of Hamas, that was, I think, the final nail in the coffin of what you might call critical friendship of Israel. People recognizing not only the precariousness of their position, but also the importance of pursuing the perpetrators of the October the 7th attacks with no mercy, and recognizing the essential and unique status of the modern state of Israel, but simultaneously saying, please stop killing Palestinians now, especially the children, That to try to claim that position somehow constituted support for Hamas was a really tragic moment for critical friends of Israel. And that is a point that people like Peter, I understand parts of the reason why, that was the point where people like Peter lost the support of everybody vaguely neutral, culminating, in one sense, because it's only one corner of the country, culminating in the scenes that we are seeing in Malmo at the moment. Two things: calling all of them hate marches and claiming that everybody saying, please stop killing Palestinians, somehow was comfortable with the events of October the 7th or supported Hamas, was almost in some cases it was a deliberate display of contempt almost for international standards, let alone, of course, international law. But more than that, in the context of hearts and minds, it was the point at which this group of people said, I don't care about anything except our right to continue killing. And that is where Benjamin Netanyahu finds himself now, when he is talking about being quite happy to go it alone and not needing the support of anybody anywhere else in the world. That usually would be the point at which you stopped to wonder whether perhaps you'd got this wrong. But of course, if Netanyahu's motivation has absolutely nothing to do with what's happening on the ground in Gaza and everything to do with appeasing his far-right cabinet members who prop up his corrupted government, then of course no figure of deaths in Gaza is too high for him. But how scary all this is. It's coming up to 10:15. The conversation I want to have is actually about the Eurovision. I'm tempted just to throw open the phone lines and say, what do you see? How does this affect you? How significant do you think it is that the eyes of the world, because daft though it may seem to many of us, the Eurovision Song Contest is a huge issue. The European Broadcasting Union is, I presume, terrified about what's going to happen in the room. They are trying to ban flags, symbols, clothing, which I presume will extend to the scarf that's often associated with supporters of the Palestinian people. I'm never quite sure how to pronounce it. I think it's a kefir. Is it a kefir? I've got a fermented drink in my fridge called a kefir, but I don't think that's the same thing at all. And you know how desperate things are when you can get into trouble for wearing the wrong scarf outside the context of footballification. So that, I think, is probably why items of clothing are on the list. You've got banners, anything being used for the purpose of instrumentalizing the TV shows would be removed. And here's the really tricky thing. Israel's initial entry, by the way, did in fact reference the victims of the Hamas terror attack on October the 7th. So if you're minded to speak up for Israel today on the rights or wrongs of banning political expression from the auditorium in Malmo, then once again, the Israeli authorities, or whatever word you want to use, once again, they've scuppered your position, both intellectually and morally, because they wanted to sing about the terror attack on October the 7th, but the initial entry was barred, clearing the way for Eden Golan to sing this song, Hurricane. And some people think the words dancing in the storm, I'm still broken from this hurricane, refer to October the 7th. But that's how art works. So I think the question I'm going to ask, and it's one of those mornings where it's very broad, and we may end up just saying, what do you make of all this then, eh? But I don't think that this organisation should have banned the Israeli entry. But at the same time, I think that entering and performing is going to do untold damage to what I would loosely describe as the Israeli cause. So riddle me that. Do you agree with either, neither, or both of those positions? You can't. Can you? Is there a case, a proper case? I mean, Greta Thunberg uses the word genocide, which is an exercise of free speech, of course, and it is her prerogative, but it's not a word that can be technically or legally applied. I think you'd struggle to make a case against calling what's happening in Gaza ethnic cleansing, a form of ethnic cleansing. But I and I think one of the ugliest things, actually, I'm going to add a third thing to the list of really crucial pivotal points, calling them hate marches, claiming that everybody saying, please stop killing Palestinian babies is some sort of Hamas supporter. And then the third thing, of course, is the claim that if we really wanted to commit a genocide, or if Israel really wanted to commit a genocide, then it would. So you can't possibly call this a genocide because they've only killed 40,000 people. That is sophistry on an almost unbelievable level. But it is still true that I don't think you can legally or technically apply that term yet. So should the Israeli entry be performing? To which my answer is yes. 034560600973. And yet somehow simultaneously, is the participation going to do much, much more harm to the Israeli cause and much, much more good than perhaps anybody there expects to the Palestinian cause, the cause of the Palestinian people, than would be evinced by not turning up at all. I'll answer this early because I don't want to waste a phone call on it. Jack writes, Russia was banned from Eurovision after the invasion of Ukraine. Why should Israel be treated any different to Russia? Because in the first instance, Israel is responding to a bloody and vicious terror attack on its own soil by going into Gaza. So the parallel, although popular, is puerile. I'm happy to clear that up, Jack. I won't put you in idiot's corner because a lot of people ask that question in good faith and I've now answered it. So don't waste tuppence ringing in to make that spurious analogy. But here is where I think we are. It would have been a mistake to ban them, but participating is really going to hurt them. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I wonder whether somebody heartbroken, somebody deeply, deeply allied to the necessity of the modern state of Israel, someone who loves Israel but perhaps hates Netanyahu, it's probably an underreported position in this country but not in other European countries. I wonder whether supporters of Israel would also wish that you weren't joining in this time. I don't know. That must be a really tough moral dilemma because you're sort of saying you don't want to be cowed. You certainly don't want to be silenced by protest if you believe in the cause. But if you don't believe in the continuing carnage in Gaza, if you, like many senior Israeli politicians, are now publicly recognizing the eternal impossibility of the two objectives existing in the same space. You could either claim to be pursuing Hamas to destruction or claim to be desperately trying to secure the release of the hostages. To claim to be doing both while killing everybody in the region was clearly ridiculous, as we have said many times on this program, but possibly when we first started saying it, people weren't ready to hear it. But if you are someone who loves Israel but hates Netanyahu, what do you want to happen? Do you want it to go ahead or not? I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, just for a moment. And I don't know. I'll tell you what I think, and I've got nothing here except an intellectual imagination and a bit of an emotional imagination as well. I'm imagining what it would be like to be one of my good friends who's in Tel Aviv at the moment and is protesting against Netanyahu's government on a regular basis, dedicated, like a lot of people in the country, to a ceasefire, but who loves Israel and fears for its future. What would she want? Would she want this to go ahead? Would she want the Israeli entry to go ahead or not? I honestly don't know. So I'll ask you, and I'll remind you of the phone number, 0345 6060 973. 23 minutes after 10 is the time. Darius isn't taking this entirely seriously. He says, James, I was just listening to your introduction and it occurred to me that Eurovision has never had anything to do with the music. That's not true. You don't have to be a fully paid up member of the Abbot fan club to recognise that Eurovision has produced some absolutely iconic moments and indeed music. Abbot, one of the finest bands of all time. And I think that Kilt is also being a little bit frivolous when they write, could you imagine if World War III broke out over the Eurovision Song Contest? But the question remains, should Israel be performing there, given the strength of feeling against the policies being pursued in Gaza? And even if you love Israel, I mean, Esther's been in touch to make a point. I have touched on Esther, but perhaps you missed it. You're right. Do you realise how many Jewish people and Israelis don't even agree with the Israeli government or in general with what's going on? So why would you ban all of us? Nearly all of us have nothing to do with Netanyahu or the IDF. It's all just so scary. And it is people like you, Esther, that I'm speaking to when I wonder whether you would rather Israel didn't participate, despite the fundamental injustice of being banned, but a voluntary decision to withdraw would silence the voices that are going to be heard, I suspect, all over the world when this competition is broadcast. Damien's in Newport. Damien, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Long-time listener.
Welcome.
Great show. I'll keep my point relatively brief, but I think it's a very, very important one. I don't agree that they should be allowed to participate, mainly because it is an incredibly frivolous sideshow, a dead cat, if you will. What's happening now, you've got this huge debate about whether they should or they shouldn't, and the miserable reality for the innocents living on the ground is unimaginable. We cannot even think about the
No, but you're
what's happening.
conflating. I understand your point, but I mean, if it's really such a frivolous sideshow, then why do you need to ban anything or anyone from taking part? Because the only reason you would ban somebody from taking part is if you thought it was a serious issue. So you can't have it both ways, mate.
No, I get what you're saying.
That's because it's true.
Okay, well, I don't, this is your domain and your manner, so I'm not going to.
Explain to me how it can be simultaneously frivolous and also so important that Israel should be banned from joining in.
Well, we're having this conversation. You're having this debate on the radio.
Yes.
And countless other stations throughout Europe and the world are talking about a song contest.
Well, not technically a song contest. Technically, they're talking about Gaza protests and the arena in which they're currently taking place. So, I mean,
you're playing the devil's advocate now, and
I'm not, Damien. You haven't. Hey, mate, let's not fall out. You made a point. It was a bit silly. And probably because you've come on first, you haven't had time to think it through properly. But you can't come on and say it's really, really frivolous. It's a big dead cat. But it's so important that Israel should be banned from taking part. And you know, as I say, let's not fall out. But just needs a little bit more work. If I was giving you back your homework, it would be a C+ for effort, but probably a D- for execution. Marie's in Maidenhead. Marie, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Marie.
I'm a first-time caller. I'm a bit nervous.
I'm not surprised because I just ripped his head off, but I will be much more gentle with you, Marie, I promise.
Right, well, I was just calling in to say that I don't agree with Israel being in the Eurovision contest, mainly because Israel isn't even in Europe.
I'm glad you've got on early because this is a point that we should probably nip in the bud. Do you know what else is not in Europe?
Australia.
Correct. So this is not a European song contest. It is the European Broadcasting Union, and it is their purview, their remit to deal with whichever countries they want to deal with. So you can't this year say Israel shouldn't be in it because of Gaza. You could only say it should be a European song contest, but it never has been.
That's fair enough. Okay, I hadn't taken that into consideration.
So bearing in mind that they've got a right to be there, if you like, constitutionally, should they have a right to be there this year politically or morally?
Well, I still think they shouldn't be allowed there this year because it's a platform that's supposed to be apolitical. Yes. And they've proven time and time again that their choice of song will be political. That's
debatable, but equally a lot of people would be on your side of the debate.
Well, wouldn't you say that having a song titled October Rain as the first...
Well, that was clearly political, but that one was excised from. They weren't allowed to enter with that one.
Correct, but then you've got Netanyahu sending a message of support to the singer Eden, saying, good on you for standing against anti-Semitism. So he's essentially putting this as a moral standpoint.
Saying, please stop killing Palestinian children is somehow an anti-Semitic position, which an awful lot of other people have taken up and run with. But that's why I think this is the worst case scenario for them, because now even people, if there are many, who haven't really been paying attention, everybody can recognise the fundamental idiocy, the repellent nature of claiming that everybody saying please stop killing Palestinian children is somehow engaging in an anti-Semitic campaign. It's going to do Israel much, much more harm than good, I think.
Yeah, and I think a country at war shouldn't perform at an event about unity and peace. Fundamentally, it doesn't fit the morals.
So you'd ban Ukraine? I'm in one of those moods this morning, Marie, aren't I? I don't. Because you wouldn't ban Ukraine, I don't think, because you think they're on the right side of a war, and there are people listening to this who think Israel is on the right side of this war. So that again would be a tricky thing to do. I wonder whether we're nudging each other, all of us, even Damien, towards a place where, regardless of what your position is, most people would agree it might have been better for all concerned if Israel had voluntarily withdrawn.
Yes, I agree with that.
Because it spares them the PR nightmare that is coming their way at 100 miles an hour. And PR nightmare is probably too mild a phrase to do it. And it would also involve what you describe as taking a particularly pungent political issue out of an environment, out of an arena in which Such things, many believe, have no place. But the point that Marie makes very powerfully is that the original song was absolutely war propaganda. The original song was absolutely designed to portray Israel, even as they continue to kill on an unprecedented scale in Gaza, to portray Israel as the eternal victim. The lyrics included the phrases, "There's no air left to breathe, there is no place for me, they were all good children, each one of them," which of course leads me to the thing I've been saying to you since October the 8th. So are the other children. The death of an Israeli child and the death of a Palestinian child in the mind and the moral conscience of most people is equal. And the people who are perhaps responsible for much of the worst excesses that we've seen in the last few months are people who, whether they're prepared to say it out loud or not, don't believe that a Palestinian life is worth the same as an Israeli life, or that a Jewish life is worth the same as an Arab life. It's 10:31. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It is 10:35 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Well, here's an angle that I wasn't expecting and hadn't anticipated, but it's an important one. And it is actually direct from the person I alluded to earlier, my friend who I thought was still in Tel Aviv, and fits very much into the category of loving Israel and not having any love for the current government there, but back in the UK now. I initially didn't think that Israel should participate. It just felt so unimportant, even a crass distraction from what is happening. However, when I watched last night, I was brought to tears by the song and performance. Karen Pelez, who wrote and composed the entry, lost close friends from the kibbutz Bari, and some of them are still hostages. It felt like I could hear her pain in the song, and to me it encapsulated the pain and emotional storm of the past 7 months, in all aspects of this continually horrific situation. So that's one takeaway from this. I think, stepping back from personal relationships, the intervention from Benjamin Netanyahu possibly drives a coach and horses through the optimism contained in that perspective when he's saying you've already won, essentially by just being there. You have already won. Not only are you proudly and impressively participating in Eurovision, but you are successfully confronting a horrible wave of anti-Semitism. So my friend is right, but then up pops Netanyahu again to pollute and undermine even the most well-meaning and honest attempt to find some good and universality in the whole situation. Martin's in Mill Hill. Martin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
Long-time listener, and I'm also a first-time caller.
Welcome
Hi,
aboard.
mate.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you. And I think I'm the model caller that you were asking for.
I think you'll find I'm the one that does the absence of modesty here, Martin, not you.
Well, basically, I'm Jewish.
Yes.
I am totally against Benjamin Netanyahu's politics and what he's doing. However, I'm also a Eurovision fan, and I've watched it forever. I'm old enough to remember 1978 with Hallelujah and that winning the Eurovision. Yeah. And it was a long time ago, and then they had another win with another song, and so they've participated in it for a long time. Yes. So the whole thing of Australia and should Israel be in it because of their location is a different point.
It's a red herring.
But the point exactly. But today's point and what you're asking is should Israel participate? You used that term sideshow before. Yes. It is. If I asked you a question, and which I'm going to, James, is what is the singers and the people who wrote the song, what are their political views? Do you know? No,
well, I don't know, but I do know that the original entry
had lyrics that needed to be changed.
Was banned on the grounds of breaking the rules on political neutrality. So
correct, but we don't know if she supports Benjamin Netanyahu. We don't know that. So because it is a song contest, I am 100% certain that it should go ahead, and she should. Banning it, for example, as you maybe suggested, or maybe one or two of your callers.
I don't think they should be banned at the moment, but it's a phone-in show, and I reserve the right to change my mind.
Maybe one or two of your callers suggested it.
For sure.
Would rub a stamp and say we think Israel is wrong, and to me, that's not, you've been discussing this for the last, 7 months.
It's not a decision for the European Broadcasting Union to take.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's sensible.
I am 100% in favour of Israel participating. I do feel sorry for the girl singing because I heard her semi-final where they booed and they, and I'll be watching tomorrow night and I'm expecting them to get nil points.
Right.
Having said that, I think UK is going to get nil points.
Well, that's a proud British tradition as well. So your loyalties,
well, I've heard the song, James.
Your loyalties won't be torn there. Just on one point, if I may.
Go on.
I mean, I love the fact. You're right. I mean, I hadn't even had the I didn't have the ambition to add that extra dimension. Someone who really, really loves Eurovision. I left it at someone who loves Israel but doesn't. I know. So that's the perfect. Year. You're right. You were absolutely right. You're the holy grail of callers for this topic. But. Yeah. It goes ahead. There's 12,000 people in the middle of Malmo now. Those numbers are going to grow. It could be disrupted. People who haven't really been paying any attention at all are going to start asking questions, and they're going to start reading about the death toll from, of course, October the 7th, but then the much, much bigger death toll subsequently of Gazan civilians. And it may do untold damage to Israel's cause. To shine a spotlight on the issue through the lens of Eden Golan.
I hear you. However, I do agree with some comments that this is just, I believe, an opportunity for protesters who I wouldn't call anti-Semitic because there's loads of protesters, and I protest against Benjamin Netanyahu's views and what he's doing. But I'm Jewish and I support Israel and those things. However, those people in Malmo calling for her to stop and Israel to be banned, there has to be some sort of, I'm not going to use the word anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism, but anti-Israel rhetoric, nothing to do with the bombing, because tomorrow night she's standing on a stage.
Let's say that's true. There'd be 10 of them in the square, not 12,000.
Yeah, but people...
And it wouldn't be an international news story. And also, if they expressed anti-Semitic positions, they'd be arrested, which is a lot easier to achieve when they're tiny in number, a lot harder to achieve if they're hiding in a crowd of 12,000 people.
Yeah, no, I hear you. But I'll be voting for Israel. I think it's a decent song. I think it's better than Ollie Alexander's one.
I like it. You've brought us back to the really important matters here, Martin. You've brought us back to the really serious issues.
Exactly. Waterloo, Hallelujah. There's been some classics and there's been some terrible ones.
Puppet on a string. We could be here all day. Martin, thank you. Thank you for keeping your good humour as well in such a complex and difficult context. 10:41 is the time. Paul's in Manchester. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James.
Hello.
Are you okay?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not so bad, thank you. I want to disagree with that last caller firstly. I think Ollie Alexander's song is brilliant, and I think the staging's brilliant. It's catchy, and it's probably one of our best entries in years. So
I'm inclined to agree with you, but I felt that I'd been quite combative with all the callers so far today, so I let that one slide, Paul.
Do you think there's a bit of homophobia at play when it comes to Ollie Alexander?
I really don't know. So I really don't. I mean, not least because don't lead me into making stereotypical observations. But Martin's been following Eurovision since 1978, which speaks to someone who is a fan of the pageantry and, dare I say, campness, and therefore less likely than most to be indulging ever in homophobia. There might be some homophobia out there with regard to his entry, but I don't think we just heard any. I really don't.
Oh no, I didn't mean that, gentlemen. I was just meaning generally because
it's possible
of the staging.
It's possible, but if you're a homophobe tuning into the Eurovision Song Contest, you probably need to have a long, hard look at your life.
But I'm a bit of a funny one, me, because I'm quite a left-leaning person. Yes. I did support Jeremy Corbyn as leader. I wouldn't support someone like George Galloway though, because I'm not socially conservative. Right. I'm a bit in the middle on all this, because both sides of this conflict are absolutely driving me mad. And I don't necessarily mean the people in the thick of it. That's different. Sure. But I mean the people. You mean Hamas
and the Israeli government?
Well, no, I'm meaning the people who are taking sides away from that, because on the Israeli side, you've got a lot of people, as you say, who turn this into an anti-Semitism issue a lot of the time.
Yes.
But them same people, I'm gay, and them same people call people woke when they call out racism, call out LGBT phobia and other things. So why are they so obsessed with anti-Semitism? Are they not woke for being so obsessed with anti-Semitism?
I hadn't been struck by that. There's a degree of hypocrisy there, isn't there? So people who call out racism are woke, but they spend their lives accusing people saying, please stop killing Palestinian children, of being anti-Semitic. It's a strange
That's
one.
what no one has ever said, that they're woke for that. And like I say, all the prejudices are wrong. But at the same time, being gay, I am also, especially after the way George Galloway was last weekend, he was disgusting.
With Lewis Goodall.
With Lewis and with Aaron Bastani.
The interview that he gave, yes. Yeah,
I mean, he's proved that there's a lot of people on the Palestinian side who are LGBT phobic. So
he's proved that there's at least one person who has come across that way. I don't know that we can necessarily tar too many people with the George Galloway brush, but yeah, your point is pertinent, is valid. I'm going to steer you back to Malmo. Should they be there? And if they are there, is it going to do more harm than good to what I'm loosely describing this morning as the Israeli cause?
I don't think they should be there, partly because I actually have never got why Israel are actually in the contest to begin with, so that's another argument. But I just think, I don't think they should be in the contest. But I do actually feel sorry for the lady, because we don't know what her opinions are, and She's just being part. She's just.
What if she turned up? What if she turned up wearing? Because I think she was wearing the yellow pin that symbolises support for the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas. I consider that to be an entirely uncontroversial gesture, but it does ally you with one side, if you like, of the arguments as opposed to the other. If she turned up wearing a yellow pin and one of those scarves that everybody gets so upset about, if she tried to cast herself as somebody who is sympathetic and mourning all the deaths, could that have worked? Could that have been helpful?
I'm not so sure, because I think the people who are really against Israel being in the contest and against the contest going ahead, don't forget that Ollie's had some backlash as well.
But just for taking part at all while Israel are competing.
They're so unreasonable in one sense, because
you're right.
If we stopped, like I said, going back to me and my life, if you stopped everything because of LGBT phobia, you'd have a lot less entertainment in the world. You wouldn't have football possibly and things like that. So I do think we've got to have a bit. As I say, I'm a left-leaning person, but I'm finding in this argument I'm somewhere in the middle.
And you've expressed it really brilliantly. You've expressed it. Well, I am as well in a way, because I don't think they should be banned from it. But I do wonder whether the utilitarian greater good for everybody would be achieved by a voluntary withdrawal. But I don't know. I certainly wouldn't put any money on that or bet my house on it or anything like that. But the freedom, Paul, to not be entirely sure what you think is one that I think is undervalued sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, and like I said, I just think I think what you said about turning up with two symbols, that would be good actually, because I think that's where everyone should be, and the people, a lot of.
But then Benjamin Netanyahu would probably disown her.
Well, but like I said, she's being reasonable. It's about a two-state solution. That's a reasonable angle to come from with all this, as far as I'm concerned. Both countries matter. The people in both countries matter, and people who are heavy on either side.
Heavy's a good
they're
word.
Both at fault. I think.
I think you've really made it. I think that's a really important position you've expressed, and I also like the fact that you've reminded us that really we should all be getting behind Ollie Alexander, shouldn't we, on this one, and cheering him to the rafters.
Well, he was brilliant in It's a Sin as well. I don't know whether you saw that one.
I see it. It was one of the best things I've seen on television ever. Absolutely supreme piece of filmmaking. Beautiful television, wasn't it?
Bucks Fizz have actually been slagging the song off, and I just think, actually, I'm not just saying this.
Hang on, mate. Listen, I can deal with the Middle East. I can deal with the Gaza-Israel conflict, but I don't know that I've got the stones to go into a Bucks Fizz slagging off the Ollie Alexander entry. I don't know. That is too. That for me, that water is too hot, Paul. That is too. Also, what is Bucks Fizz these days? I mean, do we even know? The lineup has changed, and there's disputes over the ownership. All manner of. Oof. If I'd known that was coming, Paul, I might have cut you off a little earlier. It's 10:48. 10:52 is the time. Two texts that I think rather perfectly highlight the extremities of this conversation. Nazia writes, if the Israeli entry had an ounce of integrity, they would step down and not perform. And Matt writes, if Israel won't withdraw from Rafah, they ain't going to withdraw from a singing competition. Both of which I think is true. Let me add something a little underreported to the mix, something you may not be aware of, and that is the fact that Karen Pelez, the composer of the song, has a fairly long track record of being a fierce critic of Benjamin Netanyahu and has performed in protests against his government in the past. Eden Golan's views are not really known, and indeed if they were, and they were strong, it may have compromised her ability to take part, just as the original choice of song was deemed unacceptable by the European Broadcasting Union. But the fact that the song has been written by a fierce critic of Benjamin Netanyahu is an added dimension, let us say, to this conversation. And I think Jeff in Brighton is about to add another one. Jeff, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
that is actually really interesting.
It is, isn't it?
I was just going to say, Eden Golan, I believe, in Israel, as you probably know, conscription into the IDF is
We spoke to a remarkable young lady last month who gets routinely jailed for refusing to sign up for not to sign up, for refusing to do her national service.
That's right. I think when she returns from performing in the competition, she's actually going to be conscripted into the IDF.
Yes.
So it's not as though she's objecting to, the invasion of Palestine. And so it's almost like they have a performer in the competition who is actively supporting the invasion of Palestine.
I'd say it's a bit of a leap, because the consequences of refusing to be conscripted are huge, and we don't know the contents of her mind. And even though a tiny number of people have found I would use the word courage in this context, have found the courage to refuse to join the IDF, I suspect there's a lot of people who would rather not, but do so anyway, Jeff. So I don't think we can state with absolute confidence that she is, by dint of being a subject of conscription, she's four square behind everything that the IDF does. Can we?
Well, I don't know. You have an option.
Yeah.
You do have an option. And
well, you don't. You have to join up.
Or I don't know.
And I think just reading up, her national service call-up has been delayed to let her compete in Malmo.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could argue, and Gabby Hinsliff makes this point in The Guardian today, that she is being held more publicly accountable for the conduct of this war as a singer than she ever would have been as a soldier. So there's possibly a different reading of the fact that you've brought to the table, which puts the situation in a completely different light. At risk of being simplistic, let me steer you back to the central question this hour, which is, should the European Broadcasting Union have pulled the plug and banned them?
Well, I was really happy myself when Russia, I know, when Russia was banned from the competition because of what they did to Israel.
What they did to Ukraine, which was not a retaliation, though, as we've established earlier. But I can't prevent you from seeing an equivalence there, even if I don't see it myself.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know what happened. I mean, I'm going to.
We do know what happened. We know that Russia invaded Ukraine unprovoked, and we know that Israel has gone into Gaza provoked. You might not think it's a massive distinction to draw, but it's a real one. Thank you, Jeff. 10:56 is the time. Felicity is in Darlington. Felicity, what would you like to say?
I just think that Israel's treatment has been very preferential, if that's the right word.
Nearly.
And sorry.
That's all right. I know what you mean. That's the main thing.
But if this had been any other maybe Eastern country, this wouldn't have happened, and we would have seen a bigger backlash from countries like Sweden, Iceland, and Finland, who were all very anti-Russia competing.
Yeah, I understand the point, and the last caller made it as well, but I do honestly and very deeply believe that conflating Israel's response to the October the 7th attack with Russia's invasion of Ukraine is really, really wrong, Felicity. I think it's obviously wrong. And I'm not sure it helps any cause or position on this, because it obscures the questions that we should be answering instead, which would be, do you believe that the European Broadcasting Union should have pulled the plug on the Israeli entry?
I think it's got to an extent where even countries are like asking for a ceasefire. However, writing ceasefire on your body has become a political standpoint for artists to make. Bambi-Thug, like, it was in Irish Sanskrit. Like, who's going to be able to read that? Like, I think it's the level of censorship they've gone to protect their standpoint, which means that Israel's participation in the contest has been made political by events.
Can I ask you a slightly patronising question?
Yeah.
Thanks. Are you here as a close watcher of Middle Eastern matters, a close watcher of Eurovision matters, or a close watcher of both?
Very much both.
I thought so, because you know stuff I didn't know, and you speak about both sides. I mean, because that's what we've missed this morning before your call, is the absolute interplay of the two issues. You need to take the song contest seriously. The first caller suggested that we shouldn't, but you need to, in order to understand the seriousness of the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's just, like, they have made their position on wanting to participate in this contest to be a political point.
Well, with the original choice of song, that you could argue that, but I know you were waiting to come on before. I learned, I was about to say revealed, but before I learned that the composer of the song has a very strong record of being a fierce critic of Benjamin Netanyahu. So I think the danger, it's a danger to which we've all been susceptible this morning, is of saying Israel and including in that umbrella, under that umbrella, you have both Benjamin Netanyahu, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Eden Golan, the singer, and Karen Perez, the composer of the song, and they probably wouldn't agree with each other about anything, the four of them, and yet we inevitably lump them all together. It is going ahead, and I guess you'll be watching. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. A complete change of pace now, and we are going to do one of those phone-ins where I'm quite prescriptive about who can and cannot contribute. Don't worry if you think that sounds a bit unfair, because everyone ignores me anyway. I mean, you think, I get ignored at work, let alone on the switchboard. No one pays the bill. I get ignored at home. I get ignored at work. The only time I feel seen is when I'm on stage at a book promotion event, and thankfully there's one of those in Sheffield tonight. But I don't. The rest of the time, no one pays the blindest bit of attention to my polite requests for acquiescence. But I do think that the perspective from which you answer the next question is going to be absolutely key. And we will be hearing from Natasha Clark this hour about the speech that Keir Starmer has given in Dover alongside Natalie Elphicke, hold your nose, about the continuing controversy, if that's the correct word, of small boats crossings. But before all of that, here is a story that, if we had come top of this chart, I think it would be headline news. Okay? It's a survey of, I think, 71 countries. It's a huge survey looking at all corners of the globe. And if we had come top, I think it would be in all the bulletins. I think it would be top of the charts. I think it would be used by Conservatives to claim that they were doing a bang-up job, despite all the evidence to the contrary, and I think you would already be aware of it. Do you know what it is that I'm talking about? Unless you have read one columnist in one newspaper this morning, I don't think you will. Or, of course, unless you follow the Global Mind Project and its Mental State of the World report, which provides a sort of annual snapshot of trends and insights on the mental well-being of internet-enabled populations around the globe. 500,000 respondents, 13 languages, 71 countries, 9 regions. Data is collected on an absolutely gargantuan scale, and it addresses two central issues: that the average mental health, the basic self reporting of mental well-being. How do you rate your mental well-being? And also the percentage of people who describe themselves as being distressed and or struggling with their mental health. So if we were coming top of these lists, we'd be dancing in the streets, wouldn't we? Wouldn't we? Yes, we would. Where do you think we've come? Where do you think the United Kingdom has come on these two measures? The first, which looks at the overall measure of mental health, so how we rate our own mental well-being. Where do you think we've come compared to 70 other countries? And the second, where do you think we've come compared to 70 other countries when it comes to stating whether or not we feel distressed or are struggling with our mental health? Go on, have a guess. There's 71 countries. Where do you think we came? We came 70th on the first one and last on the second. We just nudged Uzbekistan into the bottom slot on the overall mental health question, the overall mental well-being question. But Uzbekistan rocketed up the charts to number 67 and left us at 71 when it came to the question of how many people here feel distressed or are struggling. I think I might take a little moment just to let that sink in. I want you to let that percolate. It's one of those words I mispronounce, I think. You keep telling me off. I always say percolate, but it's actually percolate. I'm going to let it percolate through your consciousness. Can you feel this story, this statistic percolating through your consciousness? Good. Because it's mad, right? This is the United Kingdom. Still top 5 or 6 economies in the world, which perhaps is part of the problem. They keep telling us that as if it's supposed to make us feel better, even as we hear stories yesterday from teachers who've got hungry children in their classrooms. But we are technically one of the top economies in the world. We are governed by multi-millionaires who enjoy all of the luxuries that money can afford, and yet they are governing a population that is unhappier than everybody else in the world. Some of the other ones near the bottom, because it's not, Ireland's not doing great, I've got to tell you that as well. South Africa, Brazil, Australia, working upwards from the bottom. India, Bolivia, Egypt, New Zealand, Iraq, Pakistan, Yemen, Spain. So it's not like we are cut loose from comparable economies and we are enduring a unique set of circumstances. But as with many things about the modern United Kingdom, we seem to be enduring problems faced by many populations even more than the other populations. Parts of it, I don't think that this is a conversation that can be answered just by shouting Brexit at the radio. But you know how Brexit makes most problems worse. So you can say, here are some problems that have been caused by or contributed to by, for example, the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. But you take that problem and add Brexit to it, and it gets worse in a country that's done Brexit than it would do in a country that hasn't. So that's what I mean by problems that are being endured everywhere, but are being endured more here. And George Monbiot, who writes about this in The Guardian today, and quite rightly wonders why it's not headline news, he points out, I think quite cleverly, that while the Global Mind Project cites smartphones and ultra-processed food, I've got a massive problem with ultra-processed food this week. Huge. Can you guess what it is? I'll tell you what, if you can guess what my massive problem with ultra-processed food is this week, I'll send you a copy of the paperback of how they broke, a signed copy of the paperback of how they broke Britain. Don't ring in. Do not ring in. Do not ring in. You have to WhatsApp me, and you have to do it quickly. All right? Can we do that? Can we get in touch with people who've WhatsApped? I'm just launching a competition on the programme without any T's and C's or anything. Am I going to get into trouble for that? Okay, sorry, you can't have a signed copy of the book. My apologies. Unlucky. But can you guess why, in book-related news, I've got a huge problem with ultra-processed food this week? If you can, I'll give you the money myself, except I won't, because that would breach Ofcom regulations. And don't ring in, just text it or tweet it. So why? Why would the United Kingdom be suffering more than other countries, including much poorer countries or countries that we would traditionally think were less desirable places to live? Ukraine is doing better than us on this chart. I'm getting distracted now by funny answers to my questions about ultra-processed food. No, it hasn't given me wind. It's got nothing to do with the kebab awards. And I haven't become ill as a consequence of eating so much gammon. So please stop with the funny suggestions. There's a very real book-related reason why I have a huge problem with ultra-processed food this week. Gavin's got it right. I'll reveal the answer shortly. But first I want you to provide some answers. And here's what I thought we could do. One of the great injustices of this programme's continuing success is that people listening outside the United Kingdom do not get counted as listeners. So my enormous audience in Ulaanbaatar is as nothing when it comes to setting advertising rates or deciding how much money I'm going to be given at the end of the year. You don't get counted if you're listening overseas. But one thing we discovered during the pandemic and during the aftermath of Brexit was that we have enormous numbers of people living in countries that are not part of the United Kingdom. And we also, obviously, and much more obviously, we have lots of people listening who have not always lived in the United Kingdom. And those, I think, are the two constituencies that I'd like to start with this hour. So you are living abroad, either as a Brit abroad or as someone who has spent a lot of time in the United Kingdom. What I'm essentially saying is that you need to be able to straddle the story in the way that I cannot. I have only ever lived here. So I cannot make a meaningful comparison with anywhere else. Or indeed, and I don't think anyone's going to fit into this category. If they do, you get a Ray Liotta everywhere else. Someone who has lived or spent time in all 71 of these countries. Can we reserve a VIP lane for anybody who has spent time in all 71 of these countries and can tell us categorically why the United Kingdom is at the bottom of one table, people reporting distress or struggle with regard to their own mental health, and above only Uzbekistan on the overall question of mental well-being. So what is it about the United Kingdom in 2023, which is when the survey was conducted? It'd be nice if you took it seriously. I don't want you to say, I think it's all because of Jacob Rees-Mogg, because I mean, he might be a contributory factor, but he's unlikely to be the beginning and the end of the reason why we are the most mentally struggling country on the planet. Why do you think it is? Drawing upon your knowledge of and perspective from 2 different places or 3 different places, you've lived here, but you've also lived somewhere else. Why do you think the people here report worse mental health and more mental struggle than any other country in the world? I really want you to have a think about that, and I really want you to give me an answer. And I'm not obviously excluding people who haven't spent time in other countries because, you know, I've got opinions. You may have noticed. I just haven't chosen to share them yet on this particular issue because I am, in this interest, more interested in yours. What do you think explains the fact that the biggest international survey of mental well-being has got the United Kingdom bottom or second bottom on the 2 crucial measures of well-being? Why? What are we collectively doing wrong, or what is being done to us? What makes us different from all of the other countries on the list? 0345 6060 973. Shall I tell you why I've got a huge problem with ultra-processed food this week, or shall I tell you after the junction? I'll tell you after the junction, but I'm telling you now, you are going to need your violins to greet this news. It is 11:17, and it is a question for the ages. Why is the United Kingdom at the bottom or second bottom on a global survey of mental well-being? And I don't know if Idiot's Corner is the place to put you, but if you're saying it's because they get benefits, then you should probably give your head a wobble. You don't get benefits as a consequence of responding to an anonymised internet survey. But, you know, you crack on. And the answer to the question, David Hill got it right. A few of you got it right, actually, which is slightly... Kathy almost got it right. She said, has the ultra-processed food cookbook outsold yours? But no. It is indeed a book called Ultra-Processed Food by Christopher Van Tulleken, which has kept my latest effort off the top of the paperback charts in its second week of release, which I'm absolutely bloody livid about. I'm not going to lie to you. All right, it's very important. Don't eat ultra-processed food. But my kids need shoes, you know? And a number one thing, that stays with you for life. And this ultra-processed food bite, I was battered with the hard back. Air fryers to the left of me, Rory bloody Stewart to the right of me. I thought the paperback might just slide in. Some bloke writing about Japan was number one last week. I got a very creditable number two. I thought I might just do a Steve Ovett and sneak past Sebco's shoulder. And I did. I overtook him. But then Christopher Van Tulliken comes in with his ultra-processed food book and keeps me in second place. So I hope you're happy, Christopher Van Tulliken. It's 19 minutes after 11. And ultra-processed food is one of the things on the list of suggestions as to why we would be so low on these lists. But I want your suggestions. Paul's in Barcelona. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hello. Yes, I left the UK 9 years ago.
Yes.
Because of my mental health.
Really? Tell me more.
So,
actually, first of all, try before you tell me more, try and sort your phone line out. It sounds like you've got a balaclava helmet on, which in Barcelona at the moment is unlikely. Can we do anything about that? I don't know if you've muffled it a bit or put me on speed.
Hello?
No, it's still awful. We'll come back to you in just a second, all right? Stay there, Paul. Don't go anywhere. Nivi's in Boreham Wood. What would you like to say, Nivi?
Hi.
Hello.
So I lived in Israel, I lived in Singapore, and lived in England.
Yes.
The weather in England is really difficult to deal with. You know, a lot of getting dark, that's not easy. In the cold.
There are places on this list that have 20 hours of night time.
There's something a little about the mentality.
Yes.
You know, when you ask someone, how was your day? And the normal answer is not bad, right?
Not bad, yes.
It's always like it has a beginning of negativity inside it. It's not like it was amazing, it was great, not bad, it was okay.
All right, so what happens in Singapore when someone says, how was your day?
They say, okay, with a really big smile.
Oh, really? So there is genuinely a little bit more positive engagement, even if you're not getting... Because the last thing I really want, if I ask you how your day was, Nivi, and this may be part of the problem, the last thing I really want is for you to actually tell me. For you to actually say, well, you know, breakfast was a bit of a disaster. My Pop-Tarts burnt my fingers. But you do. There's more warmth in the engagements or something like that.
I guess there's more warmth. People are not afraid to show. You know, like in England, you don't go into different topics because you don't want to offend anyone.
True.
And you don't want to gloat, and it's there's something nice about it, but at the same time, it doesn't let people. You know, say I'm really good, I'm really bad.
So we don't talk about any we don't talk about any feelings. So we don't, which will then include, because we bottle up bad feelings, but we don't talk about good feelings either, which just creates a sort of pressure cooker mentality, perhaps.
Yeah, and you know, like the NHS with the state of it now, that there's not a lot of prevention. So even when you have a problem, the NHS has a really big waiting list. So when you need help, you can't get it, and it's just. Yeah, it's really hard.
That's going to be a big part of it. Even in countries that have got inferior health services, they would have grown up with that and known it. But to feel that your health service is worse than it was before, that's a particular problem, isn't it? Yeah. That's a particular issue.
In Singapore, going to accessing sports facilities, I think going to the swimming pool was something like 80p. Go to a really nice facility.
Money's going to come up a lot. Where were you happiest? Israel, Singapore or Boreham Wood?
I think in Singapore was my happy place. But as a mum to 3 kids and having affordable help and good weather, it was really easy.
Yes. Okay. I mean, there'll be downsides. I'm sure that people will be bombarding me soon with tales of injustice in the streets of Singapore. But we speak as we find, Nivi, and that is what this survey does. I wonder if people... Sri Lanka came top, actually. I was desperately trying to see where Singapore was on the list. Israel's really, really high on the feeling distressed, struggling measure, as in a very small percentage of people report themselves as feeling distressed or struggling. But Sri Lanka comes top on one and second on the other, which is mad in a way because they've had civil war and they've got all sorts of problems going on. And I don't know what the Foreign Office advice is at the moment, but I don't think Sri Lanka is absolutely hunky-dory when it comes to the advice being given to potential visitors from here. Silka is in Crowthorne. Silka, what would you like to say?
Yes, I'm afraid the last caller took a little bit the wind out of my sail, because I fully agree what she said.
So you're having a go at the Brits. It's our own fault we've got poor mental health, because we're chicken and egg miserable.
I'm afraid I'm just a German. I'm just... Yeah, okay. I'm not even the UK. So I'm born in Germany, and I mean the Germans obviously they don't have the most welcoming nature.
No,
historically in some places, and I lived in South Africa for a long time. My husband is South African, in fact, and I have the feeling that even in Germany and especially in South Africa, people they are so much more welcoming. And when they welcome you, they do that with absolutely open arms. There is no buts and knickers. There's nothing.
Knickers?
And knickers as in like sort of little detractors.
Oh, okay, yes. Nitpickers.
Or use this or use that. Yeah, sorry.
Not knickers. We've got plenty of knickers. There's no knickers. We got knickers coming out of our ears in this country. We've got no shortage of knickers. That's what Marks and Spencer's is for.
No. But the thing is, and like she said, it seems to be not great, but it's not bad, and there is no absolute distinguish between something is not going great or something is going absolutely fine. I can't remember since 2019 when we came to the UK. We always invite our neighbours. We have an open house. We have barbecues. We call them braais.
Yes.
And we invite people. We've not once been invited back by our neighbours, which we thought is bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre.
What did you serve?
I don't know. South African food. Is that the problem, maybe?
It could be the problem.
Yeah.
Or maybe, because barbecuing is much more popular in the Southern Hemisphere, you may have put them to shame. And they don't want to invite you back because their own efforts will be so poor in comparison.
It is an art in South Africa. My husband actually puts it to an art.
You see, that's what's happened.
We call it braaiing, and braaiing is something which, I mean...
Do you have any pampas grass in your front garden?
No, but we have a palm tree or two.
Okay. Because, I mean, there was a rumour some years ago that having pampas grass in your front garden meant that you were swingers. And the neighbours might have thought that you were inviting them round for a spot of wife swapping, and that would put them off. I imagine. Well, it might not, Silke.
Oh.
I mean, but you said they haven't invited you back, so it's not that then.
No.
So
No, they're friendly with us. Not saying that we're not friends with them, but it doesn't seem to be this mentality.
We're closed off.
The open arm mentality, which I know from South Africa, and I have to say, I don't want to die in the UK. As soon as I retire, and my husband will retire, we're probably going to move back to South Africa.
And because the people, I don't know whether this explains. I mean, this is the chicken and egg issue that you've cited so perfectly. Is that is the mental health anguish a consequence of being closed off, or is being closed off a consequence of the mental health anguish? I honestly don't know what came first, but I think they must be related to each other. Some brilliant suggestions coming in via other media as well. It's public schools and the stiff upper lip, James. Which ties in with the idea of being repressed, a repressed nation. But I think younger people talk about their feelings much, much, much more than older generations. And they're some of the worst affected cohorts in the statistics that we're looking at. And remember, it has to be peculiarly British. The answer has to be peculiar to Britain, because although lots and lots of other countries will have all of the same issues or problems, or most of the same issues or problems, we're coming bottom. From Crowthorne to Cornwall, Liz is in Truro. Liz, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Put it in perspective. I lived overseas for 10 years, Hong Kong, Singapore and Australia, and we actually chose to come back to the UK because I think before we went out there, we were misguided and thought, oh, everywhere's wonderful. Look at the shows with Australia. You live on the beach, you have a wonderful time, sunshine. It's not until you're actually living in these countries that you actually realise, actually, the UK's pretty good. And I do think there's a bit of an inherent half glass full mentality with the Brits, myself included on occasion.
Of course, absolutely.
But we really saw it when we lived elsewhere. And then you think, actually, it's not all bad. We moan about the NHS. Believe me, when you're overseas, you pay for everything. You pay for every single thing. And it makes you appreciate how good things are over here, even when they're bad. So I think that's one of the things. Even when you look online and you live overseas and you hanker after the good old days, the British corner shop online as an example, and there's plenty of other things.
Yes.
They all sell old-fashioned sweets.
Yes.
All the things that took us back to the 70s.
So you're comparing UK 2024 with other places where you live 2024, and everyone here is comparing UK 2024 with UK 1984 or 1974. It's like we're a nation of people reading the Facebook post about drinking water directly from the hose pipe and thinking that somehow life was better then, when it probably wasn't, but some things felt better. No. And we feel like a declining nation, but you're not going to feel that if you're comparing us to other nations.
Absolutely. Look how popular those Facebook pages are.
Yeah, I know. They're ridiculous.
The children of the 70s or whatever.
They're ridiculous, though.
Exactly, because people long for those days.
And that's
leaving
Brexit.
the doors open.
That's Brexit. That's Brexit.
Yeah, exactly.
You made me think of Margate. I know you're in Cornwall. But I think you can live with the competition.
We've got the sun here.
Yeah, all right, don't rub it in. I only fully understood Brexit when I went to Margate a couple of years afterwards and just got a little grip of what it would feel like to live in a place that felt as if its best days were behind it forever. I mean, no criticism of Margate at all. I think it's a really nice place. But that sense, if you see Margate, it's full of reminders of when it was the Riviera of the United Kingdom. It was a glamour spot for the whole world in some cases. Some of the chefs and the hoteliers that set up business in Margate and invited the great and the good and the aristocrats, and everything from the wrought iron bandstands, everything feels like it used to be better. I wonder if we're living through the Margateification of the whole United Kingdom at the moment. But of course, if you were comparing it to other countries as opposed to the past, you'd probably be arriving in a very different place. Staying in Kent, after this, from Margate to Deal, in fact, because that is where Keir Starmer has just given a speech about what Labour will do with regard to the so-called small boats, and he did it on a lectern that was shared with Natalie Elphicke and Yvette Cooper, two politicians who I can't imagine ever thought that they would find themselves singing from the same hymn sheet, let alone in public and on live radio. So that will be up next. Before that, Thomas Watts has your headlines. 11:34 is the time. Interesting to hear perspectives from people who have spent time in other countries, all of whom... No, not Liz Inchoro, sorry. Liz Inchoro being a Brit previously abroad, and then non-Brits who are here now but have previously lived abroad. And the first thing that emerges is a sort of sense of personal misery. Whether it is confected, affected or created, I do not know. But the idea that the UK is bottom of these mental well-being charts because almost of a self-perpetuating unhappiness is fascinating to me. I thought it would be much more external factors, and I'm sure it will when we return to the phones. But before that, Natasha Clark has the delight of being in Deal today, where Keir Starmer has just given a speech. Just to begin at the very beginning, was it a surprise, Natasha, when Natalie Elphicke opened up proceedings from the lectern that Keir Starmer would subsequently stand behind?
Morning, James. I think all of us were suspecting that we were going to hear from Natalie Elphicke this morning, but we weren't expecting her to be the one introducing him on the stage alongside Labour's Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper and the person that hopes to be taking over from Natalie in just a few months' time, the prospective parliamentary candidate Mike Tapp was there as well. And look, they were all smiles on the stage, but it appeared very awkward. The four of them sort of awkwardly looking at each other, all smiles for the cameras, and I'm sure you'll see all of those pictures plastered all over the newspapers tomorrow. But yes, very awkward. She turned up and saying that she thinks that Rishi Sunak has failed on small boats and now that he can't be trusted.
And also, I suppose, Keir Starmer showing that he's not remotely troubled by dissent in the ranks or media attempts to make a defection from the Tories more about who was being defected to than who was being defected from. This is a sort of doubling down upon the politics of it.
Absolutely doubling down, and actually who's asked at the very end a question from another journalist who asked, well, where is your line, Keir Starmer? Who would you not be prepared to have in the party? And you sort of chuckled, and someone else I think said, what about the people that you would be prepared to have from the Conservatives? He said, there'd be a very long list of people that could defect to the Labour Party. But they asked him as well, does that mean you want Nigel Farage in the party? And his answer was really very careful there. He didn't say that Nigel Farage would not be welcome. welcome. He just said that Nigel Farage probably wouldn't want to join the Labour Party at all. So that a very interesting, crafty response from Starmer there. He clearly wants to be seen to be the guy that's saying, look, Labour Party has changed. I'm reaching out across the political spectrum to people with lots of different views. And he's being very careful not to alienate people who might have voted Conservative. And we've been hearing callers from the region all morning talking about this.
So he's giving permission even to people who voted UKIP to vote Labour at the next general election. That's, I think that's a part of the analysis. I'm glad you've raised it, that a lot of other commentators are missing. But we should talk about what was actually in his speech, shouldn't we?
Yes, so he was there essentially to lay out what he would do differently if Labour win the next election, if he's lucky enough to get those keys to Downing Street. He essentially said that he would scrap the Rwanda policy, which we already knew, but this is a bit more detail, a bit more meat on the bones about what he's going to do differently. It was also quite a visionary speech, actually. I think we learned quite a lot about what the government that Keir Starmer might lead if he does win the next election. He promised not to do gimmicks anymore like Rwanda, and that was going to be scrapped, he said, as quickly as possible.
I dragged my party away from the allure of gesture politics, and I will do exactly the same to Westminster. No more gimmicks. The character of politics will change. And through that, we will deliver higher growth, safer streets, an NHS back on its feet, more opportunity in your community, cheaper bills in your home, and secure borders for our nation. An asylum system rebuilt, the criminal gangs smashed, the exploitation of some of the most vulnerable people in the world prevented, an end to the chaos, a turning of the page, a politics returned to service, and a careful, patient, determined renewal of our country with Labour.
So that was Sir Keir Starmer today speaking in Dover. He essentially said that he would introduce new powers to help clamp down on the people smugglers that are allowing these dangerous crossings. A little bit of everyone in that speech. I think there were some messages to the left of his party that he needed to be seen to be tough on borders, tough on immigration, but also to the other sides of his party who have accused him of going too far the other way and parking the tanks very much firmly on the Tories' lawn. There were some very moving moments as well, James. He spoke about seeing migrants the same age as his own two children who were, had made that very dangerous crossing across the Channel. He spoke about those who were dying in the Channel making those very, very dangerous crossings. He also talked about bringing in MI5, hundreds of new specialist officers. That will be a manifesto promise, he said, come the election, this new border command elite force. He also talked about how the Tories really have failed to deliver on this. They will obviously argue, well, the Rwanda plan hasn't started to work yet because we've not got those flights to take off. And I wanted to press him a little bit more on the timetable about, well, when exactly would you scrap this if you became Prime Minister?
Natasha from LBC. Can I just push you on the timetable for this? You've just said you're going to scrap the Rwanda plan. Is this going to be in your first 100 days? And just on the reaction from your own MPs to Natalie Elphick's defection, it's been one of shock and anger for a lot of MPs. Jess Phillips has said it's like being punched in the gut. One MP is reported to have cried at the news. Are you concerned that she makes you a very easy target for Tory political attacks and makes you look like a man that doesn't stand for anything?
Firstly on the timetable, look, we're going to get rid of the policy straight away. I'm not going to continue a policy I don't think is going to work, which is going to cost a fortune. I'd rather use the money that's being thrown at the Rwanda scheme and put it behind the command that we want to set up. And the command can be set up very, very quickly as well. It doesn't require primary legislation. Some of the powers I've outlined are already in primary legislation. Others will require some legislation, which I think we can pass very quickly. So I see this as a very fast timetable to get this off the ground. And in relation to Natalie, look, this is a very important and significant crossing of the floor for the reasons that Natalie has set out. And I think anybody reading the words she said this morning would be persuaded that this is a very significant thing.
That was Keir Starmer answering my questions on exactly when he was going to scrap the Rwanda policy. He said he was going to do that as soon as possible when he gets into power, which is very interesting because he's going to have something to replace it with. And in another answer to another journalist's question, he also admitted something very interesting, was that if the Tories are successful in getting these flights off to Rwanda, and they do put people on them and send them over to Rwanda, a future Labour government would not be taking any of them back if he got into power. So that's really interesting that he thinks that essentially Rwanda is an unsafe country, but he won't take people back from there if he does enter power at a time where those flights are already taking off. And that's going to be a real problem that the Labour Party are going to have to grapple with in the next couple of months ahead of the election. What happens if the planes do work? But equally, how will you dismantle a policy which the Tories are already starting to put in place now?
We're not waiting for another clip there.
That's it. That's it, James. I thought you might want to come back.
No, I like this. It's the great thing about the delay. I was just enjoying the bird song, actually, Natasha, in the background, which is delightful. But that's all the clips that we're going to play of the speech itself. He if I've understood you correctly, then he's seeking to turn the telescope around and focus sincerely upon the scourge of the actual people smugglers, while rehumanising the refugees themselves. Which is missing probably from government rhetoric on this issue, rehumanising the refugees by speaking about his own family.
Yeah, absolutely. And he said that he didn't want Britain to be seen as a soft touch on this. And some of his very tough language, comparing with the sort of rhetoric that he was talking about, migrants and trying to feel a lot of sympathy for these people that are making these very dangerous journeys. Some of his toughest language was when he spoke about the need to secure Britain's borders, and he promised to make it a hostile ground for these evil gangs that are coming. He said that would be enough of a deterrent. If we can stop people getting in those boats in the first place, getting to make those dangerous crossings, then that will be enough of a deterrent to stop more people from coming over. But the argument from the other side, the Conservatives say, well, actually, what is the deterrent unless you actually stop giving people a reason to coming here to Britain in the first place, that it's not going to work. He also was very interesting, I think, just sort of, like I say, on his vision for what a Keir Starmer government, what a Labour government would look like. He said there would be no return, it would be a new type of politics, an end to the 14 years of broken promises from the Conservatives. He talked about dragging his party away from the allure of gesture politics, and he promised that he would do the same thing in government, the end of gimmicks. He wants to do things that work. He also talked about wanting to renegotiate a deal with the EU in terms of migration partnerships, in terms of working closely together on things like Interpol, which is obviously things that we've had to leave after Brexit. A very interesting, wide-ranging and really fascinating speech from Sir Keir Starmer today here in Dover.
Well, safe journey home. Thank you very much, Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor there, reporting on Keir Starmer's speech, which had all sorts of dimensions to it, given the personnel who were standing alongside him on that stage or sharing a lectern with him. But as I've said to you a few times now, the next few months are going to see a increasing sense of Keir Starmer being run under the microscope as a potential Prime Minister. I'm not expecting any prizes for that observation, by the way. It's about as obvious as the nose on your face. But I am enjoying all of the people who seem to enjoy the bird song in the background. Did you do that thing again on that? Or you did? So do you know what Keith does? This is why we pay him the big bucks. In the quiet moments, Keith turns up the background so that the birds assume a role of their own on the programme. They assume they become like the backing vocalists. If I am Sonny and Natasha is Cher, the birds in the background, with Keith playing the role of Phil Spector at the mixing desk. The birds in the background, but that's a bit unfortunate. No, who's a really good producer who hasn't gone to jail? I can't remember. But Keith being the producer on the mixing desk, raising the volume of the birds to create a sort of wall of sound that I'm delighted to see so many of you enjoying. It's 11:45. 11:49 is the time. I guess rather more urgent, but similarly underreported, talking about the Global Mind Project for the first half of this hour. But we turn our attention now to a profound sense of fury and disappointment in the government's failure to bring in a law needed and promised to address the institutional cover-up of sexual abuse of children. I'm joined by Alex Renton, the investigative journalist and himself a survivor of child sexual abuse, about which he has written incredibly powerfully, and about the importance of what is known as mandatory reporting. You have never been in any doubt, Alex.
No, I've been reporting this for 10 years since I first came out about what happened at my boarding school. the many teachers there who were sexually and psychologically abusing us. And the answer always seemed to be, I think people in Britain would be amazed to find this isn't already the case, that there's a criminal sanction on people who fail to report abuse of children. And we had a child abuse inquiry that sat for 7 years, and their conclusion was we should have that. And the NSPCC have come round and they agree. And 80% of similar countries around the world, they have this. And the government announces this, what it says it is, mandatory reporting, and it turns out not to be that at all. And I think puts the whole cause back. So I think some profoundly disappointed people today, and met tens of thousands of survivors who've come up bravely, given evidence, the Jimmy Savile survivors, the football club survivors, not just boarding school survivors.
No, of course. What have they offered up instead, in layman's terms, if you like?
Well, I mean, really very little that makes any difference to the current guidelines that already exist. So the headline that the Home Office and James Cleverly will be pushing is a tough new law on failure to report, or deliberately failing to report an allegation of sexual abuse. Only sexual, not violence or bullying. But the problem with that is, and it's a 7-year criminal sentence, but if you're convicted. But the problem with it is that it's confined to officers of the Crown, which means diplomats, policemen. Right. So the headmaster of your and my schools, yes, the coach in the football clubs, the priests, the care home managers, and there's a lot of private care homes around. Yes. No new sanction on them at all. And in fact, there's so many get-outs that they can decide that their own abuse shouldn't be reported because it's in the child's best interest not to report it. And I think, because you know this story, you'll have heard that line used before.
Many times, yes, usually by men wearing dog collars and monks' habits.
And posh headmasters. Looking after the reputation of
the school, not the child, but claiming it's the child's priorities being put first. So no criminal or other sanction at all for failing to report, except for this tiny cohort of people? Or?
That tiny cohort. So they've said that there is a duty. Yeah. The Home Office is scrambling overnight to try and clarify what looks like the most half-assed piece of legislation the Tory government have ever come up with. Me. They've said it's a duty, and any sanction against a headmaster or head teacher would be carried out by their own professional bodies or the Disclosure and Barring Service. So what ICSA, the inquiry, asked for, what all the experts asked for, which is a criminal offence of not reporting abuse of a child, isn't going to happen.
If I sort of pressed you into devil's advocacy, I asked you to be litigating for the other side of this conversation. What would you say? What reasons might there be for the government having failed to do what you and so many other campaigners in this field, and indeed survivors in this field, and the families of survivors, and the inquiry considered to be the obvious necessity?
Well, I mean, that's a really good question, and many people, including some brilliant campaigner researchers like Mandate Now and Tom Perry and Jonathan West, who you've had on this show,
of course,
have looked at it. And the inquiry heard from countries around the world, Australia, America, who do have this in place, about what the problems are. And the principal problem, I think, has always been, and they think, has always been money. So when Michael Gove, years ago, as Home Secretary, first considered bringing it in, the police said, there'll be so many nuisance reports, we can't afford, there isn't, social services and the police don't have the resources to do it. But what other countries have shown, and the government has admitted, is actually, if you get effective law in place, it just works, and you save costs in other ways, and the rise in reports is about 1% to 3%. But it does look like, and I hope this is said in the Commons next week when this is discussed, Britain is saying it cannot afford to look after children in institutions properly. We just simply don't have the money to do it. We can't even look after them the way America or Australia do.
Tom Perry, I think, predicted this. Actually, you just mentioned him. He used to run Mandate Now. He's handed over to Jonathan West. He almost saw the writing on the wall for this in March of 2015.
Absolutely. I mean, and then again, when the government published its yet another consultation results back in November. No, I mean, I really feel for Tom, who suffered terribly at his own boarding school and has devoted his life since to addressing this. He's a
magnificent man. He's a wonderful man.
Wonderful man. He may have retired, but you'll see him on Twitter this morning and he's not pleased.
Well, because it's not really done anything, as you've kind of explained. It's as if the words have been co-opted without the meanings that we'd normally attach to them. It's not mandatory and it's not reporting. They will still be whistleblowers. Staff will still be whistleblowers and therefore be subject to all the vicissitudes and persecutions that whistleblowers face. Yes. Not just here. I mean, you think about the post office scandal and how hard it is to blow the whistle without statutory support. And of course, it means that the perpetrators and the abusers are the only people today with anything to celebrate.
Absolutely. And I've talked to a lot of survivors like Nicky Campbell and so on in the last 24 hours. And he makes the point that there's a huge court case in Edinburgh, which will follow, Scotland will follow this law last in February when they looked at the charges, the judge looked at the charges against a man called John Brownlee, who hideously abused hundreds of children over 25 years in this very posh school in the centre of Edinburgh. He would not have to be reported because his abuse was sadistic violence and psychological, but it wasn't sexual. No one ever called it sexual. So the headmasters there, who did cover up Brownlee, would have every reason they have a licence to continue to do so. And of course, you and I went to these hideous posh schools, and we know that a lot of people who suffer to this day, it's not because of sexual abuse. No. It's because of the fear and misery, the psychological abuse by teachers, and the violence, the
casual violence,
and the
NSPCC, the institutional violence.
NSPCC told me the other day they had advised government to include those forms of abuse, just as recently as last November. And government has not listened.
Is there anything? I don't want to tempt you into speculative territory or too speculative territory, but you know, and I know that many of the, and in our experiences, it's boys, of course, because these are the kind of schools that we draw our experiences from. Although happily, I never endured what you endured. We put an awful lot of effort into persuading ourselves that it didn't do us any harm. It's a crucial part of boarding school syndrome and the survivor mentality. And then when the floodgates open, as Charles Spencer has demonstrated very powerfully recently, the late Diana, Princess of Wales's brother, when the floodgates open, we're often stunned by what emerges and by the discovery of, if you like, the frightened little boy inside. Could that be part of the process? Could we still be dealing with an establishment populated by people who are in denial, really, about the severity of what's happened to other people and possibly even to themselves?
Well, it is interesting how many of our leaders in recent years, Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson went to my boarding school and went to Eton like me, David Cameron, did come through a system that seems to have sort of cauterized some normal human feelings like empathy for the others and push this sort of belief in toughness and power. And it is interesting that Britain has, more children in care. 180,000 won't sleep at home tonight, and more. Statistics aren't very good, but more instances of child sexual abuse than any other. But what we come back to is that cover-up culture, and I think we do live in a country.
And that reputational protection. We go protect the school, protect the tie.
But if you're a leader of Britain and you learnt to cover up at boarding school, that was the thing the grown-ups did, and then you get into running the BBC or the NHS, and Jimmy Savile comes along.
Reputational
you react
protection.
As you were trained.
Well, I keep saying reputational protection. I think cover-up is a much more accurate phrase. Can I mention your website? Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
Just your personal one, because you cover the campaigning and the work at alexrenton.com, also giving references to talks that you've given on boarding school survival and things like that. But your book, Stiff Upper Lip, Secrets, Crimes and the Schooling of a Ruling Class, is one that I would heartily recommend. But you're here in your capacity as a campaigner in this field, and a very disappointed one indeed.
Yeah, it's a dreadful day. I mean, and we knew it was coming, but it's just so many brave survivors tried so hard to get the results.
Does the fight continue, Alex? Does the fight continue?
Yeah, I think it must do. I mean, what we hope is that the government introduced this clause right at the end of the bill, just meaning we can't discuss it. So we hope the Commons next week just pushes it out, and the next administration brings in the kind of child protection that British children need and deserve.
Alex Renton, many thanks indeed. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The time now is 12 noon. 3 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A little bit. I can't do this for everybody, but occasionally I will provide some bespoke radio presenting. This is for Kenny, who's in Liverpool. Hi, James. Could you spell Alex's second name for me, please, so I can order his book? Certainly. Renton. And, well, I'm in the mood for bespoke radio presenting. Where's that message from Ned gone? Hi, James. Are you going to discuss the utter lunacy that is the front page of the newspaper today, sir? All the best, Ned. Couldn't find one. Is that the Dominic Cummings interview? Did it make the front page? Nick talked to the interviewer who conducted the conversation. What I can tell you is that this is a genuine quote from the first interview that Dominic Cummings has given since escaping from Barnard Castle. He enters the North London pub for the interview casually dressed, wearing his trademark baseball cap and headphones, an ink-blotched white T-shirt, sweatpants and trainers. I was up drinking till 3 a.m, he explains, with AI people. And to think that this man had his hands upon all the levers of power that this country possesses, and of course, probably fairly, claims responsibility both for Brexit and for putting Boris Johnson into Downing Street. And didn't that turn out well? So I presume that's what you're referring to, Ned, but I don't know for certain that it is, because probably as a consequence of that... Oh, there it is. Someone's just sent me the front page. That's incredible. But you sent it before, Ned. This WhatsApp business is just confusing me. Cummings, Boris and I caused untold harm to millions and should be jailed. I think that quote's already in my book, actually. I think he may have said that before. I think it is, in fact, close to the quote at the top of the Dominic Cummings chapter in How They Broke Britain, which is at number 2 in this week's charts, as a consequence of ultra-processed blinking food by Christopher Van Tulliken, which a lot of you are very kindly getting in touch to tell me that you've bought and really enjoyed. That would be the ultra-processed food book. Whoever remembers the number 2, eh? Whoever remembers who came in second place? Well, I'll tell you who remembers who came in second place. You will remember who came in second place, because I'm going to tell you repeatedly until you do remember. I'm one of nature's number 2s. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we return our attention now to grim tidings, actually, and the question of why the United Kingdom would perform so badly. If we'd come 10th bottom, I wouldn't be talking about it. If we'd come halfway, mid-table, I wouldn't be talking about it. If we'd come top, I don't know that I'd be talking about it. Would it be? Because those kind of phone-ins are a bit weird. Hey, why are we all so happy? 0345 6060 970. That would probably open up the floodgates for, how can I put this politely, eccentric stroke full moon type callers. Why are we all so happy? Well, James, I'm really happy because I have heard the good news. No. Why are we all so miserable? Why is this? That's a much better phone in. Do you know, the answer to this question may be contained within the question. Why is it a better phone in to ask people why they're miserable? Answer, because you're British. And you're conducting a phone-in in the United Kingdom. If this was, who came top again, Sri Lanka or the Dominican Republic, maybe the equivalent of James O'Brien on the Dominican Republic radio is now saying, why are we all so happy, my friends? Ring me now on 0345 606009. And then you just have a long succession of really lovely people ringing in to explain why they're so happy. And it would be beautiful, uplifting radio. But we're not going to do it like that. We're bottom of the charts, or indeed second bottom, pipped to the post by Uzbekistan in this context. And I want to know why you think that is, all right? And I began by inviting people who've got myriad perspectives, mixed perspectives to answer the question. But we are now becoming, as I've just demonstrated, we're now perhaps digging into it even from a perspective of only ever having lived here and nowhere else. What is it about this nation that creates a context in which general mental well-being can be so low and the percentage of people describing themselves as distressed or struggling with their mental health can be so high? Surya is in Welling. Surya, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Right. So I'll come at it from 2 angles. So I've lived in 2 countries. I've lived in India for a large part of my life and the last decade here in the UK.
Okay.
And the second thing is I work as a business researcher. What that means is I regularly conduct surveys like this. Now, one of the challenges that we find consistently is what you just described.
What did I just describe?
Well, the British people aren't ecstatic about things in general, even when the question is, is not anything to do with what we are discussing today. So when we conduct business surveys in the US versus the UK, typically, very few British people would select a 5 on a scale of 5, where 5 means, I'm absolutely happy with whatever's happening.
Absolutely fascinating. Whereas other countries, other cultures would be quite happy to describe themselves as being very happy.
Correct. So that's kind of a observational bias, and how we correct for it is by comparing. It's a relative measure that makes most sense.
Okay.
So if I knew what this studies or where we landed last year on this study, that would be a better indicator rather than the absolute figure.
Okay. Well, don't poo-poo the topic, Surya, because I want to have an interesting conversation about it. And you can only adjust it so far. They're not going to have gone into it with their eyes shut. They've been doing it for years, and there will be reasons. So why do you think, in the research that you do, British people are less likely to go for 5 on a chart from 1 to 5 describing how they feel about something, less likely to go for great strength of feeling than people from other countries?
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of the nature of how we have always been and we are. I mean, when I came to this country 10 years ago, I did not realize, for example, quite good doesn't mean really good.
Okay, it means quite good.
Yeah,
it's quite good. It's quite good.
Quite good.
It's quite good. It's quite good. Because we use quite. Quite's a great word, because you would say that's quite fantastic, and that would mean very. It's quite magnificent.
Very, but
if you use a superlative with a quite becomes a magnifier. But if you use a non-superlative with quite, it actually becomes a detractor, a subtractor.
Yes.
A quite good.
Yes. Like the best thing someone could say to you is, not too bad. How are you feeling? Not too bad.
Not too bad. Mustn't grumble.
Yes.
Why not?
And that actually means they're doing really well, which actually doesn't sound that way from an American perspective, which is where all the surveys mostly, or survey agencies originate from. So I think there's bias. I wouldn't kind of lose sleep about this unless last year we were at number 2 and this year we landed at 71.
We have fallen faster than anyone else, but not quite as far as you described. Could there not be conditions unique to the country as opposed to the population that describe this, though?
Absolutely. I mean, there must be, I can't speak to this specific study. I haven't looked into it, but there must be something. And one thing I can talk about from my experiences in India, I was just there for a 3-week kind of holiday. And I think the startup scene there. So everybody I know who's working and contributing, they have something to look forward to because there are so many great Indian companies that are opening up. They can invest in them. The stock market's moving, multiple IPOs. There's this inherent belief
sense of growth
that tomorrow will be better than today. Yeah, it will be faster than today. So that I think is
interesting work you do. I mean, you would say that, wouldn't you, in the field that you're in? But I think the statistics support you. And of course, it would be remiss of me not to point out that although India doesn't perform that well on this list actually, but that is because they'll also be asking people living in slums how they feel about their mental health, as well as people investing in IPOs, I presume.
Right, and also the median age of India and Southeast Asia in general is much lower than the UK.
Right.
So, if you ask my teenager how they feel, depending on the time of the day...
you can say that again, yes. You'd get very different answers. Is it true, and forgive me if this is wrong, I'm reading out a text, is it true that Surya means sunshine in Sanskrit?
It is true. It actually means the sun. So I was born, my mum tells me this, I have no proof, but I was born early morning, first rays of the sun, and that's how they named me.
And you have to answer this in a peculiarly un-British way, Surya. Are you a happy person?
Yes, my default state is happiness,
I thought it might be.
Which kind of irks my wife to no end.
I'd be careful what you wish for, Surya's wife, because I'm sure it's preferable to the alternative. But I love that. I wonder whether there's some nominative determinism there. If you call your son son, you call your son son? If you call your son sun or sunny or sunshine, are you increasing the chances that he will grow up to be a happy character, a happy soul like Surya? I think you probably are. What would be the opposite? Don't say moon. What would be the name that made it less likely? These days it would be Victor, wouldn't it? But that's just because of a television programme. What a lovely call. Thank you, Surya. You live and learn. Andy's in Calais. Andy, what would you like to say? What do you think's going on here?
funny, Davis. Myself and my wife talk about this quite often. I'm from and I love living Derry in Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland, northeast of Ireland, whatever you want to call it. But I probably only spend maybe 4 or 5 days a month at home. I spend the rest of my time between France, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany.
Okay.
4 things we've sort of identified that we think is the biggest main sort of differences that makes people seem a lot more happy over here is that, first of all, diet. They seem to eat a much healthier, much fresher diet than we do.
Yes.
Even when, like I stop in truck services all over these places, the options I have there are far, far better than anything I'm going to get in the UK.
Tell me more, because I don't know if you were listening. We did school dinners not long ago, and I thought I was being pranked when people in France started...
The French are absolutely excellent when it comes to school dinners.
They're taking the Michelle. I couldn't believe the quality of the food that was being served up in French dinners. So if I pull over in a French service station, well, if you pull over in a French service station...
I'm literally standing outside one here at the minute.
What do you get?
Everything's it's all fresh fruit and vegetables, fresh salad, fresh baguettes. Everything's baked in store. Everything's made. Ham and cheese, baguettes, all made in front of you. Whereas if I go to England, I might get I don't know if I can mention a Subway, a KFC, or a McDonald's,
which is processed, which is ultra processed. So even though it looks the same on the plate, they're very, very different
things. You don't want to talk about today.
No, it's a bit of a sore spot, Andy, but, there's always next week, mate. It'll probably be air fryers back at the top of the charts next week. Bloody air fryers, the bane of my life. So that is the big thing. If you pointed at that, you'd point first at food.
Food, and then the next thing is exercise.
Yeah.
People, especially in the likes of the Netherlands, I always notice it on a Sunday in the Netherlands, the cities are empty. But the countryside is absolutely full.
People are doing stuff. So what's happened here then? Because that used to be here.
They're walking with their family and their children and their grandparents. They're out walking along the canal.
Brilliant. That's almost a topic in itself. In fact, I forgot to mention this. Last weekend, my wife and I went to Hounslow Heath. We've not been to Hounslow Heath before. It's sort of Dick Turpin country. It's got fascinating QR codes where you can find out about some of the key historical figures. But we couldn't believe, particularly in the bits that were built for sort of BMXing, there were no kids around, right? Why is... Because that's a peculiar problem as well. So what is happening in Holland that's not happening here? Because it used to happen here. It happened when we were kids.
It's as I say, like I do spend some weekends like staying overnight in these and the city's just empty. The city's completely empty on a Sunday.
Why would that be though? Because they've got the same video. I mean, if we were talking about somewhere poor, they wouldn't have the tech.
Their work.
Right.
Well, you see, they have this mentality of when they're not at work and they're at home, it's all about family time.
So you'd be spending time with each other. So that's your third thing. So we've got food, exercise, family.
The third thing is there's a definite lack of cynicism, or maybe not lack of cynicism, but there isn't as much cynicism.
That's coming up a lot, isn't it? That's coming up a lot.
Something goes wrong, or even you get a bit of information here.
Yeah.
They take it as it comes. But when I notice when I'm in the UK, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and you have a bit of bad news or you have a bit of news that isn't great, it's the end of the world.
So there's less manana. There's less manana going on. This will soon pass, or this is. So I've got 4 things there, so I've got food, exercise, family, and an optimism rather than a lack of cynicism.
I was sort of throwing family in along with the exercise because they spend a lot of time together. But I think the biggest thing is I tend to find the people in the 4 countries that I'm mostly in. They have a lot of empathy.
Gosh, and empathy, of course, is good for you. It's good for your mental health.
Your mental health.
Because it cuts both ways, doesn't it? You're kind to others, you're going to be kind to yourself. Good grief, man.
Even there, the example of England there during last week. Now, I can't remember the minister, but they're talking about going after people with anxiety and mental health.
Yeah, you're right. So, God, if you've got anxiety and mental health,
seem to happen here.
And it's front page of the Daily Telegraph saying that we're coming after you if you've got anxiety and mental health. I'm no diagnostician, Andy, and nor are you. But I doubt that's very good for your anxiety or your mental health.
Well, I wouldn't have thought so.
What are you going to have for lunch?
I'm not too sure. I'm going to go in here and take a look at the...
Spoiled for choice, aren't you, mate? Spoiled for choice. That's what it is. What an amazing call. You absolute legend. What a fantastic call. And please pass on my compliments to your wife as well, who's clearly honed your thinking on this issue with your regular... But actually, before you go, would you ever relocate?
We want to retire to the Netherlands, which is our main goal. We're actually saving at the moment to buy a house in the Netherlands.
Oh, there you go. I'm not surprised, and that's why probably a large part of the reason why you're having the conversations. Thank you. That was fantastic. Just to throw it back to Surya, or Sun, as his name means in Sanskrit, and me wondering about nominative determinism. Kevin's been in touch. He says, I knew a Joy once, James. She was anything but. Andy should write a book, shouldn't he? Those 4 things there that you would point to if you were trying to work out why the United Kingdom performs so poorly on international mental health comparisons. Food, which does get a mention, and we are worse than other countries, I suspect, actually. Not just, the obvious, we always go on about, continental Europe. Germany it can't be much better than us, can it, on fresh food? I always think of the Germans loving a processed meat sausage and a dry old pie. But this is lovely, not least because I bet you had such a bonding experience, Pete. Peter's in Durham. He says, it's not just France, James. My son and I drove across southern Brazil during the World Cup of 2014. Oh, what a trip that must have been. Honestly. And the service stations there, the food was superb. You'd have lorry drivers all look like Tom Selleck eating chicken salads. There wasn't a dry pie in sight. That's a new version of a dry eye in the house, isn't it? There wasn't a dry eye in the service, a dry pie in the service station. So what other reasons are we going to come up with? I love those. So if I put family with food rather than exercise, well, no, I'm going to go for 5 things. I think Andy did himself a disservice. I think you've got food, family, exercise, and by family I mean prioritising family time. Food, family, exercise. Optimism / lack of cynicism. So a sort of just well, that's chicken and egg, isn't it? Because you're going to be more upbeat if you're doing the other 4 things. And then empathy, which comes up so often on this programme. The deliberate erosion of empathy that we've seen undertaken in this country since 2010. You can't do austerity if you've got a surfeit of empathy. You need to get rid of empathy before you get rid of Sure Start centres. You need to get rid of empathy before you come after disabled people. You need to get rid of empathy before you build an entire government on attacking refugees. So, I mean, where did we have more empathy in the 90s? The late 90s? Did we have more empathy in the noughties? Did we? Between 97 and 2010, did we have more empathy? Maybe we did, Maybe we did. And if you can persuade people that we can't afford to help other people, then I suspect you sow the seeds for a subsequent dilution of empathy, a disappearance of empathy. And yet these countries, many of these countries, Guatemala beats us into a cocked hat, way ahead of us, Kenya. Some of these countries are poor, and yet they are happier. They have better mental health. So there is something going on, and we will continue to try to work out what it is. Sean is in Tower Hamlets. Sean, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity. I do listen to your show, and I've been listening for a very long time. So this is the first time I'm being able to speak to you.
Fantastic.
I wanted to bring a perspective. I don't know whether any of the callers has mentioned. I grew up in Bangladesh. I was born and brought up in Bangladesh. I came in this country in 2000. Almost I spent half of my time in Bangladesh and half of my time in the UK so far. One of the things that I wanted to bring in this conversation as philosophy of life. So in Bangladesh, we grew up as children where families would teach kids philosophy of life, almost like introducing a family as an institution.
Oh, yes.
And we get taught that there are constitutional, fundamental values that would govern the way we live our life.
Go on.
And this is something that I realize that we lack in this society, that the way we live. I have 3 kids, 1 adult, and actually 2 adults, 1 become adult now.
Yeah.
And being a parent myself, I realize that there is a lack of kind of philosophy in the way we live our life. And I think that has a significant effect in our mental health. I mean, obviously, philosophy is a very broad term. So for example, family values.
Yes.
Family values. I mean, I have implemented some of the things that I learned, and I realized how important these things are. My wife and I, we're both professional. We work for NHS. In few years after having kids, we realized that it's important for us to give ourselves voluntary pay cut. We allowed ourselves 25% reduction of our pay, so we could spend more time with our kids, and then I could spend time with my wife and children. And
so prioritising time together. And constructive time together, not just sitting staring at the same screen.
Not necessarily. No. Okay. This is not. It doesn't go with. As I said, this constitution is not a written constitution, obviously, but we understand what are the constitutional values, what are the key values. So it comes with, say, for example, religion. For example, I mean, it's not a kind of absolute, but religion do play a part.
Mild religion. All religions essentially contain, almost all religions at some point contain a version of be excellent to each other. And if that is actually taught to you formally, then it would enhance empathy. It would tie in with what Andy said. We don't need to spend any time reminding each other of the excesses of religion or the dangers of excess religion, but the fundamental message of being excellent to each other, regardless of whether you follow the same faith or not, has got to help engender a healthier, warmer society, hasn't it?
I realize that if there is no religion whatsoever, because I'm not religious myself. I'm not religious myself, but I do actually appreciate, and as I'm growing older...
treat thy neighbour as thyself. You don't have to believe that Moses parted the Red Sea, but you can subscribe to the idea that treating your neighbour as yourself is a pretty good way to live, can't you?
Agree. I mean, it goes along with other factors like non-materialistic. Here in Western world, we focus so much on material.
We do.
And I always struggle to have a balance between non-material aspect of life and how we prioritize material over non-material.
Well, that's linked to rank and class as well, isn't it? Which I know that I know that Hinduism has a caste system, but the British class system, the obsession with rank and class, trying to outdo our neighbours and trying to no hostages, put it well, trying to pretend our country is world beating all the time, that can't be very good for our mental health. So, at a personal or a familial level, material possession obsession is going to be unhealthy. But then when you translate that into a national attitude, like we've got to be world beating, we've got to be this, we've got to be that, I've got to do better than my neighbours, both domestically on my street and internationally, that's very mentally damaging. That's very mentally draining as well. Where was your mental health better, Bangladesh or Britain?
It's a very difficult question.
Of course,
but I do recognise significant adverse effect, and I was, in comparison, in some way, was probably better off in Bangladesh. In some way, not. So it's very difficult to make this assessment. But
of course,
there are certain challenges that I didn't have in Bangladesh when I was there. Yeah. Obviously, there were other issues, but I mean, some way I was happier, and some way I was not. So it's a very difficult.
Yeah, of course, it's a silly question, really. But I'm just trying to see. I asked it just to give myself time to work out where Bangladesh was on the list of 71 countries, but I'm not sure that it was actually included. Sean, what a glorious debut on the programme. I think you've definitely earned the right to come back. I look forward to talking to you again. You've also managed to take me so close to the 12:30 news that there's a very strong chance I'll hit it on time, which it's not quite the first time that has ever happened, but it's probably in the top two. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 12:32 is the time. It's going pretty well, this, isn't it? For quite a nebulous question, albeit a question based on statistical evidence. The answers that we're getting have been fantastic. I'm with Rich on this. What a lovely thing to get in touch to say, Rich. He writes, wonderful show today. Thanks, James. I could have called at any segment, but yet again, so many of your callers have spoken for me. Have a great weekend. You too, Rich. You have a great weekend. Simon says, I visited some poor villages in Thailand in 1991 and I saw pure social happiness that I've rarely seen in the UK. GDP does not count happiness, which is probably a point at which I should pay a little bit more tribute to George Monbiot, who drew my attention to this story, writing in The Guardian today. And he essentially thinks that it is down to our peculiarly regulated version of neoliberalism. So, quite a few of you talking about what you could describe as toxic or rampant capitalism, having created some of the conditions that we are used to. And this country is a bit of a crucible or a bit of a petri dish, if you prefer, for rampant neoliberalism. And that has not created much happiness, it would seem. 12:34 is the time. Andy's in Swansea. Andy, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Oh, this is the second time we've spoken. Last time was about gender-neutral toilets, so this is a different one.
It's certainly covering the bases there, Andy. Carry on.
Yeah. Well, I've lived abroad for quite a bit. I've lived everywhere from Kazakhstan, Argentina, Peru, the Netherlands, Bahrain, Hong Kong, and so on.
What do you do? Can I ask what you do?
I in international education. Oh, wait a minute. There's a lorry passing by with some fruity stuff to lay on the fields. There we are. It's gone
Okay,
now.
no, that's fine. You've pulled over, have you? Because what you said then, if I was a suspicious man, you were about to say that I was an international espionage agent, and then you realised that you shouldn't say that on the radio because of your training. Obviously, your training kicked in, at which point you invented a lorry load of manure and pretended that was distracting you in the hope that I would not then return to the question of what it was you did for a living that saw you live in more countries than James Bond has visited.
Right. International education. I was a senior teacher.
Espionage education, espionage, training camps, was it, Andy? Training camps? Yes,
right.
I see.
To the point.
To the point.
Yeah, it was. We were happy and accepted in all of these places.
Yes.
And part of the reason was family. When you have family, they regard you very much as one of them because that's what they regarded highly.
Okay.
But the thing that I noticed really above all was the complete absence of class. There were wealthy people and there were poor people, and you could see that, but there was no class attitude, whereas here in the UK, I think wherever you're talking to people, and I know it's a bit of a hobby horse of yours, but
it is indeed.
But I noticed that when everybody is talking to you or you're seeing somebody, you're always weighing them out. Where are they from? How do I respond?
Yeah.
And that is completely absent. And everywhere from Kazakhstan, which was an old communist country, to Argentina, which had its problems with Britain, but you wouldn't think so. It's one of the most Anglophile countries you could go to, and that's really for us. I thought was striking that you didn't have to defend what school you went to or anything like that, or your accent or what have you, and we were so incredibly happy in all of these places.
And that I wonder whether that is even bigger. I mean, you mentioned it's a hobby horse of mine. Maybe I'm not giving it enough attention. I just that idea that if you know that whatever you do, you won't get past a certain threshold according to some of the measures that we all live by. That could be quite a dispiriting feeling, couldn't it? That could be quite a dispiriting experience.
Well, it is. I mean, I think the point is it depends which way you are. If you're at the upper end, it's just like the Ronnie sketch, isn't it? You're looking down on them. And at the other end, you're looking up at them. Rather than, what is the person saying to me? I mean, you make fun of Jacob Rees-Mogg, but occasionally Jacob Rees-Mogg does, as the stop clock is, what correct once. I mean, he does say something sensible. The problem is... Okay.
We were getting on so well. I think another lorry load of manure just went past then, Andy, actually, although this one was metaphorical.
Yeah, but you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean.
You're forever looking at what's behind what they're saying, the way we are in the country at the moment, which is desperate for change, partly is because there are people that are completely out of touch with what ordinary people really, really, really feel and think.
Do you know, that you just brought Keir Starmer into my mind, and yesterday's conversations about this sort of hold your nose defection, because what Keir Starmer is doing is saying to people, possibly saying to people who are on the other side of divisions from me, for example, he is saying to them, you can vote Labour as well, and we might not like that because we think he's compromising some sort of ideological purity or polluting some sort of message. But he is saying, I want to fix division, because division must be part of this as well. We're probably the most divided country politically, or one of the most divided countries politically on this. We've certainly never been more divided, and then you have the sort of prominence and the promotion of the people who specialise in division. The Farages and the Bravermans and these people who we continue to treat as if they are healthy and valid contributors to public life, even though every time they appear on television, they're calling someone a hate marcher or condemning someone because English isn't their first language, despite the fact that the same is true of their own children. It just drives all these rivets into society, doesn't it? 12:39 is the time. I like this conversation a lot because I actually feel that I'm coming out of it with a slightly better understanding of the issue than I went into it. Paul is in Tabua in Portugal. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello, mate.
Unlike Andy, I'm not a spy.
Yeah, well, that's what all spies say, Paul. That's what all spies say. Anyone who tells you they're a spy is probably lying or engaged in a brilliant double bluff. But carry on.
Really? My observation of it is the uncertainty of life, a precariousness. This obvious thing where you can't predict your next bill. How you're going to be able to feed your family. I mean, it's got to that almost subsistence level where people.
But there are countries on this list where you're right. I know you're right, but there's a piece of the jigsaw missing, because there are countries on this list where that would be an even more acute problem. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is on the list. I don't know why I've just picked that one off the top of my head, but it's hard to believe that people in the United Kingdom are struggling more to feed their families than some people in areas of the world that we associate with famine, isn't it?
I think your point about division, though, plays into this, is the fact that the sense of community that you have in the countries that rank above the UK, it's where society won't allow other people to fail, whereas I think in the UK, because of the division, it seems like it's almost acceptable for people to fall between the cracks.
And also acceptable for politicians to say the people who've fallen between the cracks don't deserve any help. They're getting too much help.
Exactly. That's the point. So if you think about the precariousness of the youth of today, and we're not talking, people in their 18, 20, 25. We're talking about, for example, our son is 31.
Yes.
And he's unlikely to ever be able to buy a house.
Yeah. That is the cohort. In fact, young men who are still living with their parents. It was big news yesterday.
We live in Portugal.
No, I know he's not still living with you, but that is the same cohort of people who are most likely to be doing so.
Yeah, he lives in Bristol, and he and his girlfriend have got what is a good wage. He works. This is a freelance, precarious, existence. He works in the media industry, and he his work comes to him as and when he connects with people or he's called upon. She's got a regular job, but they are looking at having to leave their property because they're not going to be able to afford the next pay rise, the next rent increase. And their pay rises don't obviously keep...
and that's going to prey on your mental health. Property's got to be. So we've looked at the reasons why other populations...
It's not just property, though. I mean,
everything.
We've been schooled in the last 20, 30 years to believe that our homes are a bank that we can keep going back to. It'll forever increase in price. Where, as we know, as you constantly comment and inform us, people are out there who are... don't have a roof over their heads, cannot even, put a meal on the table at the same time. So all of these things, all of these factors affect people at different levels in society. And, you might be fortunate enough to have been able to put the deposit down on your property.
But you're still worried about interest rates rocketing. And Liz Truss, of course, delivering the worst imaginable news to those. Today we're celebrating that the last recession was relatively negligible and we are now moving out of it. But the impact of those epic interest rates upon people struggling to pay their mortgages and their rents will be measured in years, not in months or percentage points. Paul, that was brilliant. I'm moving on just because this is one of those conversations that's getting more popular with every passing minute, and also because if anybody ever brings the lyrics of Tim Booth to the table while I'm on the radio, then they get very, very special treatment. And Paul Stokes has done precisely that. He writes, the band James sang it best, James, with the lyric, if I hadn't seen such riches, I could live with being poor. And that's part of the experience. That's part of the British experience, in contrast to some of the other countries on the list. We're very conscious of what we haven't got, aren't we? As opposed to valuing, which I think was the point Saria and others were making, instead of valuing what we have got. So if you were going to actually get up tomorrow or this afternoon and make changes to your life designed to improve your mental health, you would look at your diet, your exercise, the amount of time you carve out to spend with people that you love, ideally, not necessarily family. You'd make a conscious effort to be a little less cynical, a little bit more optimistic, and you would be exercising empathy. You would be practicing your empathy. You would be trying to imagine what it's like to be somebody else. And then, if you're feeling very intellectual, as James points out, you could go and have a look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you want to contribute to this conversation, there's still a bit of time left, 0345 6060 973. And before we head to the next junction, another full disclosure plug, because, of course, Gary Stevenson, who has written a brilliant book and has his wonderful YouTube channel about economics. He addresses a lot of the issues that have come up quite organically in the course of this conversation, not least the one that Paul closed with, which was the issue of property prices, unaffordability, and the very, very compelling thesis in Gary's book that it's no accident. This is a bit of a weird one. Do you want to play with me for a minute? It's. I think that this has come from some form of AI, this message. Oddly, one of my favourite bands, James, just got a reference, and then this pops up with references to one of my favourite books, if not my favourite book, my specialist subject, actually, on Mastermind. But it's wrong. And yet it reads like ChatGPT. Listen to this. It goes, in The Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield expresses his views on Britain's unhappiness in a conversation with his sister Phoebe. He says, I mean, they're nice and all. I'm not saying that. But they're also touchy as hell. They're never in a good mood. They're always moaning and groaning about something. This quote reflects Holden's observation of Britons as generally unhappy and constantly complaining, which could be interpreted as contributing to their overall discontent. Does that sound like ChatGPT? Does that sound like AI? So the reason I know it's wrong is because I don't think he'd write a line like moaning and groaning. That's what caught my eye, because it's an infelicitous line, and Catcher in the Rye, Salinger's prose is absolutely inch perfect. Every syllable works. But I could be wrong about that. It might not be the moaning and groaning. But that line there, I mean, they're nice and all. I'm not saying that, but they're also touchy as hell. Because I'm a very boring person, I know that he's not talking, A, to his sister Phoebe, or B, about British people when he says that. He's talking about his own parents. It's in the first paragraph of the book, when he is saying, I'm not going to tell you too much personal details, because my parents, I think he uses the phrase, they'd have a hemorrhage apiece if I gave away too much personal detail. And it's the bit after the David Copperfield. I'm not going to go into all that stuff, he says. And he says about his parents, they're quite touchy about anything like that, especially my father. They're nice and all, I'm not saying that, but they're also touchy as hell. I just thought that was really interesting, because it looks like a really valid contribution, a really thoughtful contribution. And it's not true. And yet it's written in a way that looks almost academic in its authority. Of course, he wouldn't be writing about British people, really, particularly Holden Caulfield. You might get the sort of prototype Holden Caulfield character writing about British people in the short story for Esme with Love and Squalor, when he drew upon his experiences as a soldier posted in this country. I told you it was my Mastermind subject, but that's mad. To have James reference and the J.D. Salinger reference in the space of 3 minutes has warmed the cockles of my 52-year-old heart, as indeed did this week's Full Disclosure. So they're all different. Full disclosures, as you know. Some of them are political, some of them are not. Some of them are based on work that's been done or books that have been written. And some people I just really enjoy sitting in the same room as for an hour. And Julie Hesmondhalgh is one of those people that you've either just gone, ooh, or you've gone, who? Because if you know who she is, you've gone, oh, this will be a good one. She's fast. And if you don't know the name immediately, you would definitely recognise the face. Best known by her own admission, best known for having played Hayley, later Hayley Cropper, in Coronation Street, the chatelaine of Roy's roles. And latterly, and one of the reasons why it popped into my head that we should talk to her, she of course took one of the lead roles in Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, playing Suzanne Sercombe. And I just thought she was lovely, and I was right. And you get to spend an hour in our company by listening to this week's Full Disclosure.
It was such an amazing thing to be part of. Anyway, and I've never been in a read-through before where the producer cries,
really?
Before we've even done the read-through, because he was so passionate about it. Patrick Spence, he was so absolutely determined that we do this and tell this story. And it was really hard to get it made.
Oh, yeah?
Because everything has to be sold in America now. Right. It's all global sales. It's all that. And they were like, it won't sell in America. It won't happen. And everybody did it for less money than they normally would. Okay. And they were just like, well, we'll do it and we'll give it a go. But nobody anticipated how it would take off.
When did you realise?
Well, I think I properly realised the week after,
right?
Because it was on the first week in January,
yeah.
So everyone was kind of like still kind of coming to after Christmas,
yes.
In news world, and I think that people were. I think the response to a really particular scene, and again it was Monica Dolan, and it was when she's playing Jo Hamilton and she's in the post office and she's just like tearing her hair out literally, and she's surrounded in receipts and she's on the hotline to Horizon and she's saying, "Thank you so much. I'm so lost with this. I'm terrible with numbers. Can you?" And the numbers and the deficit doubles in front of her eyes, and she's like, and I think that was a turning point.
Yeah.
I think some people had to turn off at that point because it was like, I can't.
It's an anxiety drink.
Yeah. But I think that is when telly is at its best. When you are so in somebody else's shoes that you almost can't look. It's like, I can absolutely imagine myself in that moment. And that's what happened. And then the week after, because suddenly it was all over the papers again and everyone was talking about it. And everyone was like, why is this taking an ITV drama? Yeah. Well, of course, as someone who's always believed in power drama, completely believed in it, I was just like, not that I don't believe in journalism. And I think there's been a lot of decrying of journalism in that conversation.
Yes.
And actually, Private Eye, Computer Weekly,
Nick Wallace.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of really good journalism around it, but it's been so sporadic.
But also, people are very keen to find a reason why they didn't care more. So they're keen to blame the journalists. That's why you were told.
Yeah.
But you didn't care more. And the reason you didn't care more is because of the power of drama. It's not, I mean, you understand, you must have been the least surprised person in the country when it went absolutely.
I was really unsurprised. Yeah. I mean, I was surprised at the
scale.
But especially in the way that we watch telly now.
Yes.
But it has been amazing to see. I mean, and I was worried that it would die off. I was worried that it would fade away, but the inquiry wouldn't be getting the coverage.
No chance. No, it wouldn't be on telly. 12:55. Julie Hesmanhouse there on Full Disclosure this week, and it takes me through the full gamut of her life. A lot of community theatre, which was so important. First time a lot of kids ever saw the theatre was because of groups, self-starting groups, putting together their own little troupes and taking them to schools and colleges. Just lovely. It's 5-1. Back to the peculiarly poor mental health and happiness levels of the United Kingdom, and I think we can safely say everybody who's listened to this properly will have a much clearer picture of the why than they did before. David's in Kensington. David, what would you like to say?
Fascinating question, James. Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
I think that one of the things that causes a lot of stress is a mismatch between what you expect and what actually happens and your ability to control it. And if I think about our values as British people, we expect fairness, we expect justice, we expect being a prosperous country to be prosperous, and we expect our government to be competent. And that hasn't happened. Personally, I blame Boris. Brexit was a lie, as you pointed out at the beginning.
Once in a while.
When we have the management of the pandemic, we have vast expenditure of public money with no idea how we would pay for it. We then had hypocrisy in the way that he conducted things in Downing Street and trying to lie to cover it up. We've got the green agenda. What winds me up hugely is things like low traffic neighbourhoods and ULIS. It's justified by the green agenda, but the truth is it's all about raising money. And the politicians behind those things, again, they're lying to us. We can see through it.
It was all going so well until you started denying the science. But I don't want you...
I'm not denying the science.
No, you are. But I don't want you to get angry with me.
Really cover it.
Well, it's 12:57, and I've done it about 467 times before.
So let's press on then.
Well, except that, in a way, regardless of where you sit on ULEZ, and I think the mayoral election gave us a fairly clear picture of where most Londoners sit on it, contrary to what right-wing media has been telling us or where they were sitting. It's another example of a wedge that has been driven between us, because with the greatest of love and respect, you're getting your knickers in a twist about being told to drive slowly through residential areas, and that's not a position you were born in. It's a position that has been inflicted
James,
upon you.
Don't tell me what I'm getting my knickers in a twist about.
Well, you just told me you just said it makes me very angry.
What? No. What makes me angry, James, is is the lying justification.
But there's no one's lying about that. That's the problem. But the fact is that even this has gone on a slightly unexpected trajectory, because you're kind of proving how easy it is for people to get angry about things that aren't true. And you start off with things that are true. Get angry with Boris Johnson for being delinquent. Get angry with the political establishment for being completely corrupted. Get angry about the management of the pandemic, which even Dominic Cummings says today should have seen him and Boris Johnson sent to jail. But then, oddly, you've got you, Les, and speed limits in your pocket, which in the context of the really big stuff you just mentioned sounds a bit silly. James texted as you spoke, David, to say, oh dear, he's gone nuts. But I think unintentionally that's an illustration of why we are such a sort of unhappy population, because people are constantly telling us things like, scientists are lying to you about the weather. And obviously they're not. But if you did believe it, you'd be bloody furious. Thank you, though. Always a pleasure. You are listening to... Is that your phone, She?
I'm ever so sorry.
No, that's right. Did we pick that up on the microphones? Did we?
That's
all right. No, you've done this long?
Oh, no.
That's
naughty step for
That's
me.
why my mental health is compromised, because I never know what epic act of amateurism Sheila Fogarty is about to bring it to carry into my studio on a silver...
There are many.
There are many. Lovely picture of you in Leicester Square.
Is there?
It's enormous, right above Burger King.
Oh, I'm glad I didn't notice that.
Oh, you can't miss it. It comes straight out of the tube. It's one of the huge ones as well, bigger than the ones on the motorway near the airports.
No wonder people were pointing on my way to work.
That would be it. That would be it.
They weren't really.
If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back. I'm not jealous, by the way. You can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, who's also got an enormous picture of him on rotation in Leicester Square. It's the two of them, isn't it? I know. Straddling Burger King like colossi. It's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Oh, dear. Oh, God, a filthy joke just went through my mind, which I can't say. I won't do that. Not after playing my Instagram live on the radio. 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 Instagram live on the radio.